Before we start this podcast, I just want to make one humble request. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and press the notifications bell icon. This really helps us bring more guests to the show and have the platform to spread wisdom. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And because you're an astronomer and your expertise in this is just so vast, I actually personally have read a lot about astrology, which is the study of planets, and there is a huge link between like astronomy and astrology. So do you believe that there is some connection within, planets and how they affect our destiny and that whole aspect of free will versus destiny? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I'm afraid. I mean, I know that won't sit well with many people.
There's mixed views. Some people think it's free will. Some people think it's destined with planets.
Yeah, I think, those are very big questions, right? Do we have free will or not? For me, it's completely clear that the historical links with astrology are real, right? That studying the motion of planets and mapping them out and seeing how they move in the sky, the subject of astronomy was much more tied to astrology historically. But that break came a long time ago in terms of essentially the way science works, right? It has to be a testable hypothesis. If firstly, the gravity of you in this room to me is having more of an influence right now than Jupiter is, right? Just the law of gravity. So Isaac Newton from the 1600s, we figured out pretty quickly that Jupiter's gravity does not have the influence that even objects in this room do. It's just the weakness of Jupiter's very big, but it's very, very far away. Now, people then will point at the sun having an influence on Earth, making it go in orbit, and the tides of the moon
they
and
see
the sun.
The tides.
So it's clear that the planets play a role in our lives, and those roles, when it comes to things like the moon and the cycles of the moon, and how that's linked to certain bodily functions,
and it affects your mood as well sometimes.
Yeah, and so those sorts of senses that, of course, that we're in touch with the universe we live in. Certainly the Earth, sun, and moon. It's obviously the sun goes up, it goes down, so that's going to have an effect on you. Whether Jupiter's in the sky or not, or behind clouds, or whether you can see, Venus at the moment or not. That's built into that system, but there's no basis for it from my perspective as a scientist at all. And that predictive power of where you're born and how you're born and which moment, and again the midwife bending over you at the moment of birth, and when she's standing on the left side or the right side of your mother at the moment of birth, has way more influence gravitationally. Now, okay, maybe if you want to posit a non-physical force, that there's a spiritual link between the planets and us, but it's not gravity, then you're in that realm then where I, as a scientist, I don't have anything to say, because we're not doing science. We're not saying that force has a predictable effect and the outcome is this. And there are things, of course, there are vast unseen forces in the universe. I see light, but that's the result of the electromagnetic force and of photons of things which I don't appreciate individually. So to say that there's absolutely no link, through modern physics, we can say that there's no link at all. If you want to then say, in a religious sense, that there's another way of interacting with us, well, yeah, what can I say? Yeah, I would again say, if one claims that Jupiter being in this location, Venus being in this location makes a person good, or makes a person more likely to win the lottery, or will make have a good day or a bad day, it's like, show me. Demonstrate this is real. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with the fact, if you look at a very, very low level daily astrology in the newspaper, all Libras will have this today.
Yes, that's not true.
No, and then you project on that and say, oh, you know what? Oh, I did feel that way today. Yeah. No, come on.
Like kind of the placebo effect sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the placebo effect is very real and incredibly powerful. We can convince ourselves of many things. Now, again, ancient astrology, which is, or the full-blown astrology of plotting out massive star charts and so on is a whole different game, right? This is just populism.
Yeah, there's like this Vedic astrology and Western astrology, which has been more modernized, but...
And of course, it's no wonder that, again, people seeking meaning in a world which is not obvious how it works. Where does thunder and lightning come from, right? Which god made that, right? It's such a powerful force, that must be God. Well, he was called Thor until we figured out we didn't need him anymore because we know how thunder and lightning works. So astrology, again, like other faiths in a way, when you posit that it's going to do something which I can test as a scientist, then you're in my territory. You're on my football pitch, right? And then if you can't demonstrate that actually works, and not anecdotally, but statistically and verifiably and double blind, all of the things you have to do for science, then I can say, no, it doesn't work. If you want to posit a kind of supernatural force which pervades the universe and somehow the planets are tied into that, and if I stand on my head on the Thursday and I do the right thing, that will happen, but it's not physics anymore. It's not science.
Yes. It's more like experience or how you're feeling.
And all I would say there is that, there's a step at the end where you could call it a leap of faith. You can say, well, everything else I've seen up until this point, right? We got rid of Thor. We got rid of this god. We got rid of that god. Why don't we get rid of the last one? Or why don't we get rid of that thing? Do we need that? Do we need that kind of crutch in life to explain the way things are? Or do we just say they are the way they are? And you have to kind of get on with it, right? So I suppose, and I don't make a claim for being clever or anything special, I made that leap a long time ago and said, don't need it, right? And I don't see that it works. Now, have I made a lifelong study of astrology? No, I've decided to devote myself to astronomy. So yeah, and maybe I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, but no, it's like in the same way that I'm an atheist, not an agnostic. I've made that kind of, I've come to the conclusion, I don't see why it's needed, so why hang on to it?
Yeah. And I think shifting gears a little bit, so I have a background a little bit in medical science, but not at all in astronomy. So this whole concept of, are UFOs real? Are they? I have no knowledge, to be honest, about this. So you would be in a better place to say about UFOs and their reality.
Yeah, I think that the best book I could recommend to anybody to read on this topic is a book by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan, famous planetary scientist, astronomer, unfortunately died quite a couple of decades ago now, but very influential on the way the public saw science in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He wrote a book called The Demon Haunted World. It's a lot about superstition and the way that humans place patterns on structures in the world in order to kind of find partly meaning or find excuses or find conspiracy or mystery. And Sagan has quite a long section on witchcraft and on UFOs. And he writes quite coherently about the fact many of the phenomena associated with UFOs, this sort of idea of abduction, this idea of a crushing weight on your chest and a kind of a inability to move, almost the same phenomenology exists in descriptions of witchcraft from hundreds of years earlier. So ufology really came around at the time when the first satellites were being launched, or just before. The idea that rockets were being launched and could be sent to space, it kind of got transposed into, oh, it's aliens then. Whereas 200, 300 years earlier, it was witches doing this to me. And many of these phenomena, and I'm not to reverse it, I'm not a medic, I'm an astronomer, but the way Sagan talks about it, he would suggest that many of these things are things that the human body goes through. And the most obvious one is we dream.
Yeah.
We go to sleep at night and we're in a different place than is expected. The human brain conjures up visions.
Dreaming is a state of consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can experience terror. You can experience great exhilaration. You can have lucid dreams where you are absolutely in that place.
But are they real when you wake up?
No, exactly. I mean, I've lucid dreamed a few times in my life. I mean, people claim you can actually train yourself to a lucid dream. I'd love to, because real dreaming it always has that unreality to it. But the few times I've been lucid dreaming, I have been absolutely in that place. I've kind of known that it wasn't real, but every stimulus in that space was real.
Have you been able to kind of shift your dreams or guide yourself through that? Or
occasionally I have been able to interact with dreams in the sense of sort of saying, it sometimes just in the sense of, this is not real. You need to wake up now, right? I mean, many of us have flying dreams, right? And or anxiety dreams, things which are very much from
subconscious blocks,
subconscious things that you want to try to get out or achieve, or things from childhood. I mean, where the flying dream comes from. I know, there have been times in my life where I've woken up in the morning and convinced myself, oh, maybe you can fly, because that was so real. And then 3 minutes later, you go, shut up. I mean, that's ridiculous. So the fact that those things exist, and of course, humans are not all the same. Humans experience many chemical shifts in their brain in different ways. There are all sorts of medical diagnoses of, at the extreme, schizophrenia and other things. So the idea that the human brain can convince itself that it's in a different space, but not really knowing how to explain that. I mean, another classic one for me would be migraine auras. I don't suffer from migraine headaches at all, but for many years now, on a, sort of not a regular basis, sometimes if I'm more stressed, I'll get them. You get these amazing jagged patterns in your eyes which expand out from the center. Scotoma it's called, and it grows into, and it's very geometrical. It's not kind of blurry, like blobby. It's sharp, jagged.
I think I know what you're talking.
Yeah. The first time I had it, it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, I'm actually very prone to migraines and headaches.
I'm lucky. I don't get the headaches afterwards. I get the aura, but I don't get the headaches. And if I wasn't able to go to the internet afterwards and find what was one of those, I had it when I was talking to somebody. I'm going, what is going on? This is not good. So now I know what they are, and they go away after 30 minutes, and I'm cool with it. But that's partly because other people explain what it was, right? So you can see how things like UFOs are a part of a continuum of people projecting things which they have felt. And then it becomes part of conspiracy theory, of course, which is very convenient in the modern world to say the government's hiding stuff from you. You don't trust them. There's evidence for this. And as I said earlier on, right, astronomers, scientists are all too talkative. There's no way we would have held that secret. And again, people will say, you would say that, and it's all part of the conspiracy. And where do you go with conspiracy theory, right? Yeah. And many conspiracy theories, UFOs, if you do the kind of a matrix of conspiracy theories, people who believe in UFOs also tend to believe in other conspiracies, 9/11 and all this kind, So it's a state of mind which also can be self-reinforcing, right? If you feel paranoid that people don't believe you on one thing, you'll find other places that, but this must be true because that's true over there as well. And social media, of course, has enabled this to spread wildly, because historically you might have one person in the village who also believed in these things, right? And everybody else would say, come on guys, just stop this. But now you can build a village, a town, a city worldwide by joining a club and saying, yeah, but it's true, isn't it? Like, I've seen it over here. And I mean, the one thing I would say is everybody carries a camera now. Highly sophisticated camera.
You don't know what the truth is.
Well, the thing is that where are the great pictures of UFOs? I mean, we're still seeing the fuzzy rubbish that we saw back in the 50s and 60s when nobody carried a camera around. It's like, come on, everybody should have high-def pictures of UFOs all the time if they're real. The flip side being that we can also create amazing visual effects these days. And people are making fake videos, dumping them on the net and saying, hey guys, look. So there's a political angle to this as well, of course. And that political angle is an interesting, particularly in the American context, is people don't trust government. People say you're hiding. Show me the evidence. And then certain politicians weaponize that. They will say, I'm a kind of renegade politician. I want to be on your side and say the government has been hiding things. So I'm going to create an investigation into UFOs, and I'm going to force NASA to join in because I need to show that maybe they are hiding things. And it only adds to the fact that people think you are hiding things. So I've seen things in life. I've seen UFOs in the sense of unidentified flying objects. I'm a pilot. I've seen things in the sky. I've seen things in the night sky. But you go, it's one of those. There are amazing things occur in the night sky if you spend time looking at it. Even satellites going overhead and blinking lights and all sorts of things, or Venus hovering by the horizon, or mirages. But there's a wish fulfillment also about all of this. I want to believe that there's something beyond, the X-Files thing. I want to believe. It's like, yeah, well, if you want to believe, then you probably do believe, and you're discounting the evidence which says it's not real. This is just human psychology. So, but again, UFOs really only became prominent when people started actually putting stuff into space. So maybe in 50 years' time, it'll be another phenomenon, which is, I don't know, maybe it's the people with the vaccine, right? Oh, I shouldn't take the vaccine because it's going to, do things to me. It's another conspiracy theory. Sorry, I'm not very entertaining in that regard when it comes to these sorts of things. It's like, can I do it?
You can give a really brief answer to this one. Do you think the world is going to end at some point? Or when people say, like, oh, it's going to end in 20 years or 30 years? And you can be short about this, but like your first instinctive answer.
Yeah, it depends what the question means. If, there's the apocalyptic thing that the world is going to end in a religious sense. Armageddon is coming. The world is going to blow up. No. I mean, there's a lovely cartoon I like to phrase this. I think it expresses it in a short way. It has a little child being held in the arms of the goddess Gaia. And the goddess Gaia is a very loving character. She's looking down at the child, and the child is looking up and saying, it's just a cartoon, it's not real, saying, oh, I feel so sad that we've screwed so many things up, and we're so bad, we might not be here in the future. And the goddess is looking down, and then sort of halfway through the cartoon, the child says, it'll be so sad when we're gone. And Gaia says, you know what, we won't miss you, we'll go on without you, it's fine. So the Earth isn't going to come to an end. It'll find another equilibrium. It will be disastrous for many animals, many species. It'll be disastrous for us. Will our civilization end in 10, 50 years' time? Let's put it this way. We're walking rapidly towards conducting that experiment, and we should be aware of the experiment we're conducting. It could get very ugly very quickly through climate change, through the wars triggered by climate change. I hope it doesn't. I have children. I don't want it to. I'm not trying to be a doom monger. We know how to fix it. We know what needs to be done. We're not doing it.
Yeah. And the last question is, and you can take maybe a second to think about this, but if there's one advice that you think, like the best advice you've received in your life so far, what would that be? You can think about this one. Something you think that is really powerful.
Yeah. I had a teacher when I was young. I had many teachers when I was young by definition, but I had one particular teacher, and he taught me to look at things skeptically. And I don't mean be a skeptic, be a doubter, be a pessimist. Look at things and try to find out what somebody might try to sell you. I was young at the time. He probably didn't use those terms. He said, look at the world, examine the world, try to think about it. Don't be sucked in just by the easiest, quickest first answer. The world is very complicated. Much of what we do is, when we're engaged in daily life, is fantastically complicated, and we navigate our ways through it. But we do so by blocking lots of things out because it's too complicated to absorb all of that. Take the time, sit back, have a look.
Have the right judgment. Try to.
And ask other people as well, right? They may have better judgment than you. How to phrase it, right? But the other thing, and it's a completely different thing, which I've told my kids over the years, is remember, other people are different to you. And I don't mean that in the sense that you're better, quite the opposite. Don't necessarily believe that other people's experience is the same as yours. Find your own, and be skeptical if somebody's coming along, or you look at somebody and say, how can they possibly be thinking that? Well, they have a different experience to you. So be aware that we share a lot, but there's an individuality about people as well, and bridging that takes effort, right? Don't judge people for what they're doing necessarily, but also realize don't expect people to do what you want just because you think they'll do the same thing you want.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big takeaway. I've tried to learn that, implement that in my life as well. Well, it was wonderful having you, Mark, here. I'm so glad we could host you here, and your flight is tomorrow, so it was perfect timing. And you're intelligent, and you definitely have a very spiritual and compassionate side to you. So thank you so much. It was a really big honor.
Pleasure to be invited. Thank you very much.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for coming to the studio. I know you're a long way from home, so it's really cool that you're here in person. He's actually a senior scientific advisor for the European Space Agency. He's also an astronomer, and he has a spiritual side. So we will definitely talk about that and dive into that later in the podcast. But now that we got that done, let's take off into the top of everything, which is your experience at the European Space Agency. Please feel free to share anything that you witnessed while you're at your time there that you think the audience might not know about.
Yeah, so I joined the European Space Agency 15 years ago. I've been an astronomer, of course, throughout my whole career. Just to sort of put a background on that, I'm British. I did my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees at the University of Edinburgh. And then moved to the US to work for NASA for a while. That's kind of always the thing, right? In olden days, NASA and America is the great dream. I was working on Hubble Space Telescope just when it got launched in 1990. So that's a long time ago. And that's still in operation. Of course, there were problems with Hubble at the beginning. From the outset, there was this problem with the optics, which meant that it couldn't take sharp images. And in fact, I lost my job to that because some money was taken back from the project I was working on to fix Hubble. And, in a chaotic sense, let's say, I ended up then moving back to Europe. I moved to Germany. And I've been using big ground-based telescopes then, most of which are in places like Chile, working with what's called the European Southern Observatory. So this Europe has been really important in my life. And then moved to the UK, went back for a while, and got offered this job, or applied for the job, got offered the job at the European Space Agency. And space is the place to be for certain kinds of astronomy, for sure. But the project I was involved with already at that point is a thing called the James Webb Space Telescope. That's what's on the logo here on the shirt. I had been involved in that for almost 10 years already, I think, at that point. Then the opportunity came to move to ESA, stay involved in the project, but then have a broad view over many other projects. And, there's so many different missions that we fly in collaboration with NASA and with Japan and other partners around the world. But probably the one, even though we'll come to it, I'm sure, talking about James Webb Space Telescope, which is the one I started on, the one which probably emotionally means the most to me, and therefore that kind of comes in a sense to connectedness and spirituality, if you like, is the mission called Rosetta. And Rosetta is now at its 10th anniversary of the thing which it's famous for. It was launched actually 20 years ago in 2004 on a journey towards a comet, comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, named for the astronomers that discovered it. And the Rosetta mission was going to go to that comet, rendezvous with it, fly around it, and then land on the surface. And that all happened. So the big year for that was 2014. The spacecraft had been asleep for 2.5 years in hibernation out towards Jupiter in the cold of space. It had to wake up so it was going to rendezvous with the comet later that year. And had to wake up, come back to life. And there was this real exciting moment in January 2014 where everybody's thinking, will it, won't it? And the tension in the room when we were waiting to get that signal back, because we weren't commanding it. We won't say, wake up. It had to wake itself up on an alarm clock. So there was that real tension. And then that all happened, and then kind of flood of interest in the mission awoke. And we did so many things that year to work with people to publicize the mission, but also share the science. We got to August, rendezvous, saw this comet for the first time. November, landed on it. And I've just before I arrived, I've been talking to the person, Elsa Montagnon, the night of the landing on the comet. She was the one who said, we go. We've just been discussing the 10th anniversary this year. And thinking about that coming here and knowing what we were going to be talking about really made me reflect on the fact that it's human beings that make space missions work, right? It's teams of people that come together. Sure, there's a metal box out there somewhere in space, but it wouldn't be there if we didn't decide to do it. It wouldn't be there if we didn't think it was worth dedicating a big fraction of our lives to. And it wouldn't be worth doing if everybody else didn't get something from it as well. So
that makes sense.
So there's been lots of great moments in my time with ESA, but that one, working on Rosetta in 2014 until 2016, well, it just still makes me sort of well up even thinking about it.
Wow, no, that's amazing. Now that you were talking about that humans make a lot of the space missions work, in regards to that, nowadays we have AI, right? We have, Chat GPT, of course, but then so many companies are working on incorporating AI into different kind of different machines, different projects and all that. What do you think is the risk of AI in regards to like, will it replace human beings? And especially in regards to space missions, as you were talking about how humans make it work, is there any universe in where maybe astronauts won't be needed anymore? Or like, like you have self-driving cars, will there be self kind of flying, rockets and stuff? Or
Well, from that sense, of course, most of the things we do actually are robotic.
Okay.
Rosetta mission didn't have an astronaut sitting on top of it.
Okay.
And since the Apollo missions of the late 60s, early 70s, no astronaut has been beyond low Earth orbit. Now, of course, now with the Artemis missions going back to the moon, NASA and the European Space Agency in Canada humans will go back to the moon again fairly soon. But everything else you do is robotic. And that, in some ways, is partly because these missions may take a long time. You can't send a human all the way out to Jupiter and back, for example. We just launched a new satellite towards Jupiter April last year, and that's not going to get there until 2031. So that kind of is a long journey.
Yeah.
So that's hard. And there are also places which would be much too dangerous for astronauts to go. So we have a mission called Solar Orbiter, which is going... is on a trajectory which takes it periodically very close to the sun, and then it loops back out again.
Okay.
And if you were a human on board that, well, you would be kind of toast. So it's not a good place for humans to go. So this synergy between human missions and robotic missions has been around forever. There's nothing new about that for us. The question is, what does a human put into the loop? Where does a human add something? And is that part where the human is that replaceable by AI? And there's, interesting questions there. So for example, if you send an astronaut down to the surface of the moon, or onto the surface of Mars, let's say in the future, if they're a trained geologist, are they going to be better able to spot the one rock out of the 3,000, which is the weird one?
Yeah.
Okay, because they've had years of training. We're all very good at pattern recognition. You can spot that one thing. And we've tried to run demonstrations where you try to get robots to do that and autonomously find the interesting rock amongst many. And I suppose today that wouldn't work, but who's to say that AI couldn't do that in the future? But then, spaceflight a little bit is also about the human endeavor and the human mystery.
Yeah, true.
And astronauts are avatars, right? They represent you and me. They represent people. When they go there, they can come back and relate their experiences. People relate to people. Yes, you can make people relate to robots, and we did with Rosetta and Philae. The little lander went to the surface. We kind of anthropomorphized them, made cartoons about them, and people felt sympathy for them, even though they're just metal boxes.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother level. If the astronaut comes back, and you see that with our astronauts, it's almost slightly weird. People want to touch an astronaut. You've been to space. But that, right? That there are many endeavors where this Premier League footballer or this actor, or I don't want to say the classic phrase, living the dream, but at some level, yes, these are doing things which most people never will. And that can be inspirational. And we shouldn't ever forget that, right?
Oh, definitely.
There's been lots of people saying for years, get rid of astronauts. We can do everything with robots. I don't think that that's particularly clever, not because it's the most effective way of doing the science, but it is often the way that keeps the public interest in spending what is a lot of money on things which otherwise, you could say, why don't you build hospitals instead? I'm not saying that sending a human to Mars will just wipe away all human poverty. Not at all, of course not. But creating that human connection and saying, beyond the kind of mundane life I have, where I have to go to school or go to the shops and do my work, there's a little bit of an aspect of dreaming, and the humans, in a way, do that better than the robots do.
Wow. That's giving me a lot to think about. Now, this might be the science fiction movie geek in me asking you, so I apologize in advance. But I wanted to talk to you about time travel.
Okay.
Now, you have these movies like Interstellar and stuff where people are like, and I think I read this online, it might be from the movie, but it might be online where I read it, but I heard somewhere where it's like, if you go near a black hole, time changes or something, like 1 year on Earth, if you're near a black hole or you're going through a black hole, it's like 80 years or something like that. And like, I wanted to know about, is time travel possible, or is it very theoretical, or what is that whole shebang about?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some aspects of time travel which are very simple, and there are some aspects which are more complicated. So in a way, let's talk about kind of the simple thing. You're sitting across the room from me. We're separated by, let's say, 1.5 meters, 2 meters. It has taken a certain number of nanoseconds for light from you to travel to me. I'm not seeing you as you are now. I'm seeing you as you were in the past, right? Nanoseconds in the past.
Yeah.
When we look at the sun, we're seeing the sun as it was 8 minutes ago. It takes that long for light to get here. So being able to kind of time travel, not necessarily in your body, but to be able to see things as they used to be, we do that all the time. But of course, you and I, we feel like we're just in the same time, right? But astronomy is very much about seeing the past, because we look out so far away from Earth that it can take millions or billions of years for that light to have traveled to us. So, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope is looking for objects which are so far away from us. It's taken so long for the light to get here that actually we're seeing them as they were shortly after the Big Bang. So even though the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago, we can still see it today, because you just have to look far enough away that it's taken that time for light to get here.
Oh, wow.
Right? So everything we do in astronomy is a kind of look back. Now, some things are close by the sun. We don't talk about the sun. We're seeing the history of the sun. It's 8 minutes ago. That feels like, and of course on Earth, we're used to the fact that we're sitting here in Delhi. It's kind of lunchtime, mid-afternoon. The people in Europe are just getting up. The people in Japan are beginning to go to, they're having their evening. So that kind of desynchronization, we're kind of used to that. But not really used to it when you talk about billions of years ago in the past. It's like opening up a textbook and seeing pictures of, ancient India or ancient Rome and saying, oh, look, we can still see that. But we're seeing a living movie of it. It's not just a painting in a book, right? We're seeing things happening in the past, and it's taken that time for light to get here. Now you would say, okay, what does that teach me? Well, the universe was different when it was young. So we actually see that galaxies look different. The very distant ones, they look quite different to the ones which are around us today, because they've evolved, they've changed over cosmic time. So in that sense, time travel, in a kind of a sense of being able to look back, we do that all the time. Now, this thing about time travel where, black holes and so on, this is Einstein's world. This is special relativity and general relativity. And if you posit that the speed of light is finite, which it is, that it takes some time for light to travel from A to B, then there's all sorts of consequences that Einstein and other scientists worked out more than 100 years ago, called the theory of relativity. And if I travel super, super fast, if I accelerate at a high speed and go out close to the speed of light, in my reference frame, my clock is ticking just as it ever was, right? Time doesn't slow down at all for me. I'm watching my watch. It's 1 second per second. It's time for tea. It's time for light. It's all the same. But you, looking at me back from Earth, if I've gone off, you see my clock very differently. You perceive my clock going much more slowly. Now, you can't actually perceive it in the sense because I've gone off so fast, the signal's coming back. It gets a bit more complicated. But if I go out there for a couple of years, close to the speed of light, and then come back close to the speed of light, then, yeah, indeed, a century could have passed here while just a couple of years passed for me in space. So in that sense, if you like, that's a way of visiting the future, right? But it's non-causal, by which I mean I can't affect time travel is often the paradox of time travel is often in the other direction, going backwards, right? If I just go out and come back in the future, that's possible. Okay. Going back into the past has a whole different, problem with it, right?
Okay.
Because if I go back into the past to just when we started this, this podcast, and I, one of the cameramen, we call somebody up and say, you've got to run out into the street now. We changed the whole dynamic of the way the podcast works, right? I changed the history from there on. So that kind of interfering with the past stuff, and killing your own grandfather kind of thing, so you're never born. The paradox of, well, how do you ever go and kill him? Then he's alive again, and then you're alive, then you go back and kill him. So those sorts of paradoxes are not allowed in physics. But the thing you mentioned in particular, going near a black hole, that's gravity, which is changing. It's effectively stretching space-time. So everybody knows about space, right? This around us, up there. Everybody knows about time, the thing on the dial. What most people don't realize is they're actually the same thing. They're linked to each other. We don't talk about space, and we don't talk about time in physics. We talk about space-time. And that's because if there's gravity in a certain location, a mass, a black hole or even a planet, that changes the fabric of space-time, and it changes the flow of time relative to other places.
Wow.
Right? So this is what Interstellar posits, right? You get close into the gravity of the black hole, and you get too close, and suddenly everything's changed on the other side.
Wow. But could a human being actually survive going through a black hole, or would he just get torn apart?
Well, yeah, there's this thing called spaghettification, right? Kind of cool thing, right? If you get close to a small black hole, so the strength of gravity increases as you get closer and closer to the black hole. And if you're in a small black hole, the rate of change of gravity over a certain distance is very high. So effectively, you get stretched out, right? It's like a Willy Wonka thing, right? Where, you've eaten the wrong sweetie and it stretches you out into this gummy band, right? And that, of course, disrupts all your molecules. That's not, you don't come out of that looking so good. But here's the weird thing. If you get close to a supermassive black hole, so even bigger, the radius over which the gravity changes there is much larger, and you don't get spaghettified in the same way. So you can actually, in principle, survive a fall into a very big black hole, which is what happens in Interstellar. Here's the weird thing, though. For you journey into this black hole, and everything's kind of cool, and you're motoring along in your spacecraft, and that's all nice. And you fall past the so-called event horizon, and you don't see a difference at that point. You're happy. People on the outside see something completely different. As you move towards the event horizon, everything seems to slow down and slow down and slow down from their perspective, to the point you never actually cross that limit. You never actually cross that line. You're stuck on it forever from their perspective. And so that asynchronization between how space and time work locally and in a relative sense to each other is actually, it's real. And you might think it's all abstract as well, right? What do I care? Well, you probably have a mobile phone and you use the GPS on it to navigate around. The GPS is the American system, Galileo, the European. Now, these satellites in orbit, they have very accurate clocks on them. So these clocks, essentially, by sending time signals backwards and forwards to your phone, and from three or more of these satellites simultaneously, the time differences help you work out where you are, right? The satellites know where they are, and they send these time stamps, and so that's how it works. But they're at quite a high altitude above the Earth. The gravity's different there.
Okay.
And that means they're actually in a different time frame. And they have to correct for that. They actually actively have to correct, knowing general relativity, they have to correct the timestamps they send out for where they are in Earth's gravitational field, because we're in a different part of it.
Yeah.
So if general relativity didn't work and you didn't put those corrections in, you'd crash into every second building or drive off the bridge because you would just be in the wrong place. So it does have very practical implications in real life.
Wow. And a few minutes ago, you were talking about astronomy, right? Now, and you also told me that you have a spiritual side as well. So in your mind, is there any connection between astronomy and spirituality at all?
Yes. Now, we have to be clear about what we define as spirituality. I'm not talking about religion here. I'm not a religious person at all. I don't follow any particular set of creeds or any sort of rules on how to run my life. I don't believe in an afterlife. For me personally, I'm an atheist. None of that aspect, the kind of classical religious aspects, exist. But I think there is if we define spirituality very broadly, I would say there definitely is a spiritual aspect to the fact that we, you, I, everybody else here, everybody watching, we're just collections of molecules. Those molecules have come together to make a conscious being. And that conscious being all of a sudden then starts asking questions, you know, where am I from? Where am I going? What's my purpose in life? Religion can provide an answer or a framework for seeking answers, but science does as well, because what's remarkable about many of those molecules is that over the last 100 years, the molecules in our brains have been clever enough to figure out where those molecules came from. And many of them came from inside stars.
Okay.
So when the universe started 13.8 billion years ago, there was hydrogen and helium. Basically, those were the only atoms.
Hydrogen and
around,
helium,
the only elements. All the stuff, or a lot of course, we do have hydrogen in our bodies that's in the water, H2O. So there's still quite a lot of material left over from the Big Bang in our bodies. It hasn't changed. It's always been like that. But we also have carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, potassium, and bits and pieces, iron. All of those elements were made after the Big Bang in the hearts of stars, or in the atmospheres of stars, or in supernova explosions. You needed to make one generation of stars first for them to blow up or to die, to belch out winds, put that material back into space, and then process again. Cosmic recycling, we call it. And over time, you develop the elements we have in our bodies. And so to know that you're made of dead stars or stuff left over from the Big Bang, but which has become conscious, and which can actually understand that and ask questions about that, that seems to me quite spiritual, because, you know, I view myself as a temporary assembly of molecules and atoms left over from the universe.
True.
Here for a short time. I don't believe that anything happens after me. You might die, but your body doesn't, in the sense that the molecules go back again, right? Yeah, you'll have some molecules in your body which were part of other people in the past, or part of the, you know, or at least part of stars, and that connectedness. So my consciousness may go away. In my mind, I think it will. And I know that doesn't sit well with other, you know, faiths, but for me, I think I will be gone.
Okay.
But this stuff, well, it may become part of something else. And that, you know, it doesn't give me kind of the relief that I will continue on, which many faiths look for. But, you know, I don't particularly feel bad about that personally.
Now that we're talking about, like, you know, the physical form in the body, what are your thoughts on cryogenics? Because these days you're seeing I think I saw a documentary, and it was showing videos of all these, like, people just freezing their bodies in hopes that maybe decades later or centuries later they could, I guess, you know, lack for better words, like defrost their bodies, and like, because by that time maybe there's some technological advancements and they can cure their, you know, whatever physical diseases they had. Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's, like, logical to do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think those are very different questions. I think it's probably possible. Is it happening now? There are quite a few people who've already frozen their bodies. Were they frozen with a correct protocol to avoid splitting all the water in the cells, right? I mean, you know that if you put food in the freezer, certain vegetables don't come out tasting very good, right? You know that some things freeze well, some things don't. And of course, that's been studied over the years. People have looked at how slowly to freeze humans. It all sounds very, you know, sci-fi and gory, but it's been done. And there are bodies in liquid nitrogen around the world. Do we know that we've mastered those techniques yet? And do we know how to bring them back? And will their consciousness be there? We sort of know that, you know, people can die briefly. People can be super chilled by falling into icy lake and then come back alive again, you know, hours later if they're kind of defrosted, and they're still the same person, right? So the brain maintains some memory. Do we know that will happen if you put somebody in liquid nitrogen because we've never tested it, right? It's not a very ethical test. We've done the first bit, put somebody in, but we haven't woken anybody up because they don't want to be woken up until we've figured out the cure for whatever, right? Yeah. So I, you know, the technical aspect of deep freezing people may be conquerable, right? I mean, you can do tests on small animals, and there are even much smaller animals called tardigrades, for example. They're called they often have the nickname water bears. They're tiny little millimeter scale things, and they live in water. They're everywhere. There's nothing unusual about them, but they look like kind of, grizzly bears.
Yeah.
They've blown up. They can completely desiccate themselves they can survive in space. They can go into orbit outside the spacecraft, and they have a way of adapting to that circumstance, which then they can come back alive if you sprinkle some water on them afterwards. Now, we can't ask them whether they remember their favorite color, right? There's no way of they're a bunch of programmed cells. They're not quite the same as having a consciousness necessarily. Now, the other question is it something we should do?
The ethical side of it, yeah.
Yeah, of course, anybody can make an individual choice for themselves, but this is often sold as there's the extension of this, which is, wouldn't it be great if everybody could live longer? We're all very sad, quite rightly, right, when loved ones and family and that they die. And my brother died before Christmas, and he knew it was coming. We knew it was coming, but it doesn't take away from that pain of the memory, right? And
whether it's a job or anything, like, because we know there's going to be an end, we kind of value our life. I think when I was like a couple years ago, I was obsessed with like these vampire shows, and like you see like these vampires who are like immortal, and they've been on the planet for like thousands of years, and they're like that. After a certain amount of time, you just stop valuing life as a whole, and that got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? That kind of makes sense, because like if 1,000 years, 2,000 years, like how many partners are you gonna have? How many like people, like, unless like everybody's immortal, like at one point things you get used to stuff,
Yeah.
So I agree. There's this whole spiritual thing between life and death that kind of puts our whole journey on this earth together.
Yeah, and I think, of course, accepting that is part of that journey.
Yeah,
and it's something which doesn't come easy, right?
No,
I mean,
definitely not.
You and I are sitting here kind of thinking, well, yeah, that's an abstract thing, right? It's not going to happen. Well, knowing that it is, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance about that. We can talk about it, but we haven't quite yet accepted it. Now, of course, I'm a bit older than you, and I've seen people around me pass away and had to deal with that. And of course, then that brings your own mortality into mind.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting aspect of life as well. Of course, children they shouldn't be surrounded by morbidity. They should think about what's possible for them, what they can enjoy, what they can achieve, how they can make sense out of this life. And when that comes in later, and for some people it comes young, some people it comes, some people try to deny it as long as possible.
Yeah.
And our modern society has made that possible in many ways, right? Not only in a kind of, the ultimate end games like cryonics or genome alteration, but just, I can go and buy genes and nobody cares if I'm 55 or 112 and I'm still looking like I'm a teenager, right? Yeah. There's this idea that we sell this business of eternal youth in our modern culture. You only have to look back mid 20th century. I mean, I say it like it's a historical period. I actually lived through some of that, but the world was very different, right? Adults became adults, and adults took on responsibilities, and they dressed differently. They didn't act like teenagers. I'm on social media, you're on social media, age sort of disappears at some level there. It's a place for, I find it vaguely embarrassing when 55-year-olds act like they're teenagers.
Yeah. No,
but our culture is built around that. And I think that acceptance of the life and death cycle has probably, it's kind of been pushed off as if there is a fountain of youth just over the horizon. And we will, if only we try a bit harder, we will find, as you said, if everybody's going to be immortal, then why not? Well, that has its own baggage as well, right? Surely having children and bringing new people into the world is a very fundamental part of who we are.
Yeah.
Clearly, biologically it is, but even philosophically it is, right? Passing information on, ensuring some kind of legacy. But if we're all going to live forever, then we have to stop having children, because how can we add all those people
Oh yeah, true.
You and me having the same podcast for the next 1,000 years. Is that
And
going to be
and
interesting?
I'm ready for
right?
that. I am ready for that. Let's make that happen. That's a good option for me. And I liked how you talked about that. That if we're going to be on this planet for so long, like what's going to happen, right? Now that makes me wonder that are we the only ones on this planet? Like, again, this might be coming from my own curiosity after watching so many science fiction movies and stuff, but like I feel like a lot of people have this question where like is there life on other planets? Are there conscious beings on other planets? Or are there actually aliens in our planet and we just don't know about it? Or maybe is the government kind of like classifying it and does not want us to know about it? What's your take on that?
I would say from the outset, you obviously don't have a cat, because if you did have a cat, you would know that there are aliens on this planet already, and they are the cats. It sounds facetious, but right, we're at the point now where we're perhaps going back to AI. We're at the point where we can maybe even decode the language of some animals. For example, whales. Whales have long lives. They carry a culture of sound, and whales have different dialects. You can actually hear individual whales and how they speak but we can't decode it yet. The real question is, can we? Right? How intelligent are whales? How intelligent do they carry memory? We know elephants do, for example.
Yeah.
Elephants clearly carry memories, and they carry empathy. They there are boneyards which they go back to where their ancestors lived. I mean, these are very human things to do. So I think the first thing I would say, there are aliens here on this planet. We just don't choose to accept that.
Okay.
Because of the very hierarchical structure of the way humans think of themselves at the top of the pyramid, right? And they're all just a resource for us to use. Driving here, and it's different culturally, right? Driving here, it constantly amazes me how any of the cows in the streets here live.
Yeah,
right?
I know, true.
And you place a value on them which don't get in any other culture. No, they're food. They belong in the field, kind of thing, right? And of course, there are cultures that eat certain animals that others don't. So I think that breakthrough with primates and with cetaceans, there's that. If nothing else, let's go and figure that out. And partly because that will also help us if and when we might see aliens or signs of intelligent life elsewhere. How we can't speak to the whales. How on earth are we going to speak to these guys, right?
Yeah, true.
Perhaps.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, actually.
Because they're not going to turn up all speaking English with accurate translators.
Yeah, true.
No, but to come back to the basic principle, is there life elsewhere? It's a discussion, of course, that we talk about in very public terms, in the sense of people. This is a question people are very interested in. There's a whole technical side of trying to work out how you might go and find this signs of life elsewhere. But very basically, there's vast numbers of stars. There's 200 billion stars in our own Milky Way, and there are trillions of galaxies, each with similar numbers of stars. So the number of stars in the universe is unimaginably vast. And for us to think that we're the only planet at a certain location from the star, that the energy allows to have liquid water, and we've got evolution in a stable state over billions of years, that just doesn't seem plausible, right? It seems as though that uniqueness argument for life on Earth being the only life in the universe seems very unlikely. It's a whole different question, though. And to be clear, we have not discovered it, but we are on the verge, maybe in the next 10, 20 years, of being able to find signs of life. You might not, unless you go to a planet and you start digging up microbes, which we can do in our own solar system. We can go to Mars, for example, and we have missions which are going there to dig the soil up and look underground. But at a remote distance, we can look at the atmospheres of other planets. We now know of more than 5,500 planets going around other stars. We know that if we extrapolate from the things we've looked at, they're everywhere. There are planets everywhere. We can measure their atmospheres. We can see oxygen and carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, all sorts of stuff. Some planets are really inhospitable. There's no way we would not survive there for sure. But we will, and we're on the cusp of finding planets which are very like Earth. Now, if in those atmospheres you also see things which, in a way, require life, so certain elements of our atmosphere would not be the same if it wasn't for life on this planet. It's a non-equilibrium chemistry, we would call it, that takes place to do with the cycle of us breathing in oxygen, breathing out CO2, plants taking CO2 in, turning it back to oxygen. If we and plants didn't exist, Earth's atmosphere wouldn't be the same. It's not just that we use the atmosphere, we create it as well.
Yeah.
So if you look for that in other planets and other atmospheres and say, whoa, hey, that's strange. There's a kind of a mix here which could not be, we think, without life. That would be the kind of tracer that you would find. Now, intelligent life, something else entirely, right? We have no evidence for it, and I speak, nobody will believe him if I say this, but I speak as a member of the European Space Agency. We are not hiding any evidence of aliens. And I can speak for my colleagues at NASA. Of course, you will say, no, you can't because the Pentagon's involved. Scientists are the biggest talkers in the world. We love to talk about what we do. That's why I came here. I was very happy when you invited me to come on the show because I thought, hey, this is good. Let's talk about what we do. We couldn't keep a secret if we tried, right? I mean, we're just not that kind of people. Now, maybe the military, but even then, right? There's so many people in different positions. How would you keep that a secret? So, again, by definition, the conspiracy theorists won't believe that because it's like, oh, you would say that. What can I do, right? So, but then that raises the question: if we haven't seen it here, if it's not here, and we're not hearing radio signals from elsewhere, and we're broadcasting radio signals out into the universe, they can be detected by others. So far, we've only created a bubble of radio signals around ourselves, about 100, plus or minus a century in size, because we've only been broadcasting radio signals for that long. So all stars within 100 light years of us, that light travels, 1 light year per year, that they could have heard us by now, right? If they have an advanced technological civilization with big radio telescopes, the signals get fainter and fainter, of course, as you go further away. So you need a big telescope. But we're doing that experiment the other way around. We're listening out.
Yeah, didn't Stephen Hawking do something like that? I think he threw some sort of party or something, and he sent out a message or something through time or something like that.
Yeah, he said he held a party and he sent an invitation. He said can't remember how he did it. He held a party and then the next day he sent out the invitations. And then he said if there are any time travelers, they would have received that message. They would have come back and they would have come to the party. The fact that nobody was at the party, it's something like that. I mean, he did something interesting as well, which brings to an experience that I had specifically. He was concerned. So, let's go back. One of the possible explanations for what's called the Fermi paradox, Enrico Fermi postulated, look, if life can form in many places and there's a chance of advanced technological civilizations, where are they? Why aren't we hearing from them? Right? Why do we seem not to be able to detect them? And there are many stories, thoughts about the Fermi paradox. One of them is the so-called dark forest theory, famously written into the books recently by Qi Liu, the three-body problem, which has been made into TV series. There's already, I think, a Chinese one. Now there's a Netflix one coming.
Oh, I heard that. One of my friends who were from China, they were auditioning for that show. Yeah.
It's a great trilogy of books. It's well worth reading. But kind of a central tenet of the book is the dark forest theory. And the idea there is that if there are advanced technological civilizations out there, then because technology changes so rapidly, I mean, look at us over the last 200 or 300 years alone, right? From killing people with swords to killing people with nuclear weapons. I mean, over a very tiny time, cosmically, technology advances rapidly. So the chances of us being at just the same level as the aliens that come is they're either going to be super superior to us because they're millions of years ahead, or we're the ones, we go to Mars and we see microbes, right? So that desynchronization suggests that you need to be very careful about broadcasting and telling people that you're here, because most civilizations out there, if they exist, they might be kind of benign and they might, oh, welcome to the club, old boy, right? Science fiction stuff. 1 in 100, or maybe more or less, and you only have to look at Earth to figure this out in the human race. 1 in 100 will be aggressive and say, squash you like a butt.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask that, if aliens do contact us, do you think they'll be doing it just so they can invade us, or would they be doing it just to make a relationship?
Yeah. Well, the dark forest theory would say that It doesn't matter, even if it's only 1%, that's still going to be lots of civilizations. They will come and squash you like a bug. And the reason for that is that because the rate of growth of technology might be different for different civilizations, there'll come a time when you're superior to them and they'll squash you like a bug. So the kind of the two tenets of dark forest theory are, firstly, hide, don't tell people you're here. And two, if you find another civilization, kill it. So it's incredibly dystopian. But that brings me back to Stephen Hawking. Hawking talked about this, there's nothing new about this idea. He said, we're being dumb. We're broadcasting signals out into space. So we should think about what we're doing here. It was an intellectual statement, right? So fast forward to a few years ago when Hawking died. And we were asked by famous musician Vangelis, who himself since has died. We had worked with Vangelis on the Rosetta mission, which I was talking earlier on. Wow. He wrote music for that mission, and we were, and it was a privilege to meet him and be in his studio. And Blade Runner, Chariots of Fire. This is the man, right?
Wow.
So we worked with Vangelis, and he contacted us and said he was so inspired by Hawking and the work that he had done. He wanted to. He had put a piece of music together with Hawking's voice and music, and he asked for it. He had donated this to the Hawking family, and it was actually played at what was called the interment of Hawking, when Hawking's body was placed in Westminster Abbey in London.
Oh, okay.
And Vangelis, in a broad sense, said, what can you do with this from the European Space Agency because of Hawking's connection with space research? So we said, we can beam this message into space. And, so that Hawking's voice and the music would go on out into space. But we were very conscious of the fact that Hawking had spoken about this business of don't send messages into space, right? So I contacted his daughter, Lucy Hawking, and we talked to her about what she felt he had meant by that. Because after all, let's be honest, adding one little piece of music in the cosmic signals we send out, when we're constantly sending messages out to our spacecraft to connect with them, we get data from them, we command them with the same dishes we use. So there's just one extra piece of music for 5 minutes didn't change the fundamentals. So she said, no, go ahead, it'll be fine. We didn't want to kind of do something which would be contravening what he believed. But the fun thing about it, and it sounds like it's a bit of PR, a bit of a cheat, but I looked up the time when his body was going to be interred in Westminster Abbey, and I knew which of our dishes we were going to be using to beam the signal into space. We have these big 30-meter dishes, and we were going to use the one in Spain. Mm-hmm. And so I figured out what time of day it was, where would we be able to point this dish. I didn't want to send it just straight into space. And by sheer luck, it turns out that the nearest black hole to Earth was going to be overhead at that moment. And so, as a tribute to Hawking, who famous for working on the theory of black holes, I thought we'll send the signal towards the black hole, right? Now, it'll take many, many years to get there. And the little bit of PR spin was that, and this isn't true, so don't take this seriously, but enough people believed it, that if we sent the signal towards the black hole, it would just go into the black hole and disappear forever, and no aliens would be able to hear it. So, of course, not true, because the signal we send out so big, a few bits of the radio wave go into the black hole. So it sort of felt like we were saying, yeah, but don't worry, nobody will come and invade us because we sent Hawking's voice into space. But that's going back to the dark forest theory, and should we just be silent? I think that's a very dark and dystopian way of looking at it. There are other answers to the possibility of why we don't hear from other civilizations. And there's a really interesting idea. So the basic thing is called the Great Filter. Where from microbes to us with podcast microphones and so on, where on that technological route does the Great Filter occur? Where does life basically stop to the point that we never hear from it, right? So philosopher at Oxford, Nick Bostrom, has come up with this kind of endpoint, the two extreme ends of the Great Filter spectrum. Mm-hmm. And one of those is that life is incredibly uncommon, that life just does not form very often. The particular circumstances that happened on the Earth are so rare that life never even gets to be microbes, very rarely, and therefore never gets to be us.
Yeah.
And then the chances of that happening in this vast universe are so small that, yes, it might be in a few pockets, but it might have happened, millions of years ago, or it won't happen for millions more. We're just crossing over in the night. We won't hear from them, and we won't, they won't hear from us. Now, the other end of that, which Bostrom postulates, is no, actually, life is quite common and arises in many places. The great filter happens when we get to this, when we get to podcasting, by which I don't mean podcasting, but the technological abilities to do that, because this is accompanied by the ability to kill ourselves as a civilization, right? We live in a world where it is possible that we could end it all, either semi-purposefully with nuclear weapons, or kind of by dumb accident through climate change, or a range of other things. And so Bostrom says, maybe the great filter's there. You only get to live for 100 years after you get to the point of being able to send signals, because that comes with all the technology which allows you to wipe yourself out.
Wow.
And if you're not clever, then you're dead. Now, here's the thing, and this is where Bostrom is, makes a really interesting point. He says, if we go to Mars, or we go to one of the icy moons of Jupiter, say, and we discover life there, which is we're trying to do, right, as scientists. If we discover that there is life in those places and it developed independently of here on Earth, then that says life does develop everywhere, because twice in one solar system. And that must mean that the great filter is the other one that people kill themselves off. So Bostrom would say, you really, really don't want to find life on Mars, because if you did, then that means the great filter's coming and we're about to kill ourselves. Now, of course, it's philosophy, right? It's playing with ideas. And it could be something else entirely. But these are, in some way, important questions, I think.
Yeah, no, and you touched a topic that I actually wanted to elaborate on. You talked about Mars, right? Now, of course, like there's all these news channels, you see Elon Musk is trying to, send people to Mars. Now, my question in regards to that is, what do you think it's more about humans inhabiting another planet, and is it more commercial? Like, do you think it's going to be more like people are going to go there, like, really rich or wealthy people are going to go there for a vacation and stuff? Is it more on that end, or is it more like to save resources on the Earth? We're trying to expand where we live. And do you think it's logical even to think about moving and kind of creating society on other planets like Mars? Or
yeah, so those are motivations, of course. I mean, the motivation for low Earth orbit space travel with Virgin Galactic or with SpaceX, going up and then having bragging rights when you come back to the golf club, right? It's a little bit like the endless queues of people going up Everest. You pay enough money, you can get dragged up Everest. I mean, there's still a chance you'll die, so there is a risk. Same as sitting on a rocket, there's a chance you'll die. People are willing to take that risk effectively for bragging rights. Now, sure, I would love to climb Mount Everest, right? It would be cool. But that way, where there's these long lines of people who move one step every 5 minutes because there's such a queue of people, that can't be a spiritual thing, right? So that space tourism, I think, for low Earth orbit is a real market for people who have lots and lots of money, and that will increase. Mm-hmm. Making a commitment to going to Mars, a 9-month journey one way, and then waiting on the surface for 18 months and coming back. That's a commitment. But the rationale which people in this domain cite is making the human species multiplanetary is often posited as an insurance policy. It's suggesting that, yes, we may screw this Earth up. We also might get hit by a large asteroid, as killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. There are other things like the supervolcano. I mean, asteroids we might be able to detect in advance, and we are doing this. We have a mission going either later this year or next year called Hera. Hera's going to an asteroid. It was visited by NASA's DART mission a couple of years ago. The DART mission actually deliberately hit a small moon going around the asteroid, and it changed the orbit of that small moon. And this was a demonstration that you can perhaps deflect asteroids before they come and hit Earth. So we're going back to revisit this thing with Hera soon to see exactly what happened in that area. You know, what happened to the asteroid? How did the material get spread out? What's the strength of the asteroid? These sorts of things. So you could avoid perhaps an asteroid, but a supervolcano, if Yellowstone erupts again, I mean, think about the Deccan Traps here in India, this vast plateau of volcanic material that went on for, you know, I'm not a geologist, let's say hundreds of thousands of years or even longer, perhaps. Just volcanoes do that on the Earth. And the supervolcano, we are not going to be able to stop it, right? So the theory there is we need to get off Earth as soon as possible to put bits of ourselves on Mars or elsewhere. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of this. I'm not saying that it isn't something we can do or something that we might even want to think about doing, but there's a real sort of philosophical issue about that for me, and that is that this is escapism at some level, partly because the thing we're running afraid of, most people are, is something which is climate change, and the world is changing, and we are responsible for that change. Like, oh, let's just go to Mars and it'll be fine. It's like, no, you really, really don't want to go and live on Mars. There's nothing we can do to this planet, Earth, including nuclear war, which will make it as bad a place for humans to live as Mars is. Mars just isn't made for us at all. It's just not, you know, you'd end up living in caves or under bubbles.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
Now, okay, there's the idea that over long periods of time, you could dump water into the atmosphere and terraform. It's like, okay. I mean, yeah, nothing in the laws of physics says no, but it's also the hubris. It's this idea that we've somehow qualified at this point to become interstellar or intergalactic, that we've demonstrated our abilities to the point that it's fine that we go out there. And I'm not, you know, in a philosophical, I'm not really sure we're ready for that. I don't think we have demonstrated that. And then just in a purely numerical way, let's say you need 1 million people to go to Mars to ensure the genome, to, you know, you can't send 3 people, right? Because they'll all very quickly, genetically, that doesn't work to preserve the whole human race. So let's say it's 1 million, and that's a number that's thrown around. So it's either 1 million really rich people, because they can afford it and they go privately, and they all go there and they arrive and they say, right, who's cleaning the toilets? Because it's not me. I'm a rich person. I didn't come to Mars to clean the toilet, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or you do probably what would be more sensible, which is to pick 1 million people randomly from the Earth. Okay. Now, 1 million people is roughly 1 in 10,000 of the population of Earth. You don't know 10,000 people. I don't know 10,000 people. So it's not going to be somebody you know. It's not going to be you, statistically. It's not going to be your family. It's going to be random people from around the globe. And the whole philosophical idea is then they're going to Mars to save the human race, but they're not saving you personally. And that's that great dichotomy that we have, is the individual, the personal, who am I?
Okay.
And where does my altruism go? You know, how do I feel about other people?
Mm-hmm.
And that altruism for different groups of people is different, right? It's just my little tribe, my little group of people, my football team, or it's the whole of humankind. But it identifies with humans. It doesn't identify with the DNA. This idea that sending our DNA out there and having humans go on is somehow what everybody wants to do. You know, that I would give everything and only to be able to save the human race, but I don't actually mean anybody that I know. Really? Have we really got to that point that we believe that? And the extremum of this is quite an interesting thing, which actually just drives me bananas, is that there are some people in Silicon Valley who think that we should also not only save the human race in the solar system, but prepare the rest of the galaxy for our arrival. So some people have already posited sending DNA, our DNA and our microbes on interstellar probes to other stars to land on those planets and spread our genome ahead of us arriving. Right. Now, you know, it's great science fiction, but there are genuinely people talking and thinking about this these days. And it just worries me this is some kind of, it's an illness at some level, right? That society has got to this weird point that we can't even fix the stuff here. I mean, I'm in Delhi, right? A city of enormous contrast. In one taxi ride, you see the rich and the poor and the haves and the have-nots. And for all the will in the world, and all countries are working to eradicate poverty. And of course, in Western Europe, we're not free of it by any means. So this isn't a judgment thing. It's just the world. We're deciding to move on before we've even kind of fixed the place where we are. And for all the statements about altruism, I'm doing it for humankind. It's like, well, actually do something for humankind then.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was like, that's what I was thinking. I was like, if you're putting so much money and so many resources into, creating these missions to move humans to Mars and all that, can't you spend some of that money or that resources into fixing the actual problems that are happening on this Earth, whether it's the population growth issue or anything, right?
Yeah, and the argument there, of course, is you can do both, which is probably true as well. So I don't think it's an excuse. I think genuinely people believe this. I can also help the planet while preparing for the next stage. And there is an argument, and this is an interesting one, is that if indeed we're reaching the brink of civilizational collapse through all of the issues which we face, that we need to be taking this step now because we won't be able to take it in 100 years' time. Right? If you genuinely believe, if it is you think that the human race should go on as a species, we should be doing it now because we might not be able to in 100 years. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I've been talking to some people recently at this conference that I've been at here in Delhi and other things. Some people are very, how do we bring people together on this that it doesn't then, for example, one of the things that people struggle with is that it's become identified with the billionaires, right? It's become identified with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others. That they have appointed themselves or have been allowed to appoint themselves the kind of arbiters of the destiny of humankind because they have the money and they have the power and they have the lobbying and maybe they have a vision of some kind, that they are now in the position to do this. If we were to do it properly, though, shouldn't we do it from a governmental level, a civil level, an institutional level? So I had conversations with some people where we saying, well, shouldn't we come together and figure out how to do this without it being identified with the billionaires, because there are all sorts of reasons perhaps that we shouldn't be identifying with them in their kind of cult, the way that they've become extra beyond kind of the control of governments and everything else, right? That putting your destiny in the faith of billionaires to save the human race, well, when was the last time that ever worked, right? Now, you can also say, no, we shouldn't, because if we die, we die, and that's a kind of form of karma, and if we can't figure ourselves out. So that becomes quite philosophical there, right? I mean, it would be perfectly reasonable to say, sorry, if we can't fix this planet and make it livable, then we deserve to expire. And other people rail against that and say, no, I know how to solve this piece of the puzzle. Let's go and do that, even though the rest of it's not working very well. I don't have an answer to that, but I think sometimes the kind of cult aspect of you're a Luddite, you don't want to go into space, I work for a space agency, I do want to go into space. But I think the philosophy of some of this kind of cult of escapism is a little worrying, because it is a bit of, I'm leading into the future, it's the destiny, and it's for the good of you. Trust me, it's all for your good.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it this way. Who made you, God?
Yeah, no, I agree. And we were talking about Elon Musk, and I think I read this somewhere where he was advising people to go buy pieces of land on the moon.
I don't know that he's been involved. And I don't really mean to focus on him. I mean, in a way, he's a symptom rather than a cause, right? We've created a society in which amassing such vast wealth is possible. As the phrase that some people use is, every billionaire is a policy failure. Mm-hmm. We've built a world in which this is possible, right? And the fact that he likes sci-fi and so does Bezos, this is, the sort of an inevitable. I don't want to personalize it with them. And I know if I do, I'll have, the fanboys come and attack me. So, it wouldn't be the first time. But yeah, I think the fact that we're in this particular position is a symptom of the way the world is. There's kind of a febrile end of the Roman Empire kind of sense about it a little bit. And it's like it's become a bit of a free-for-all. And institutions have become distrusted. And that's been weaponized at some level, right? By populist politicians coming in and saying, don't trust the elite, don't trust government, don't trust hierarchy, don't trust... I will save you, me personally, my view. And we see that in Western Europe, we see that in North America, we see that around the world, that populism as a way of garnering support, but also creating division, pulling people apart to say, it's not my fault, it's not your fault that things aren't working, it's their fault, right? And we see this in buckets. I mean, Brexit is a classic example of that, right? The British, a small fraction of the British, but enough that it was a majority in the referendum of the people who voted, said, let's leave the European Union because we don't want those people coming over here, right? It's like, how can you cut yourself off from the biggest market on your doorstep? I mean, I'm unabashed about that. I don't care who comes after me for that. That was the biggest mistake that's been made in the UK in hundreds of years. We'll pay for it. But that's just a microcosm of populism spreading around the world. I mean, I have to say the words, but this year is full of crucial elections around the world. And yet we're at this point where democracy is being manipulated, partly through social media, maybe through people who put money into lobbying, or also by hacking people's inner wishful thinking and instincts. Like, I want you to tell me everything's going to be great and that me and my family and my people are going to be cool, right? We're going to, and if that means demonizing those people, okay, I'm for that, And I think, really, I mean, racism is rife and alive, and it's a thing that exists in the world, and it's hard. You can kind of see how it is if it's constantly manipulated. The idea of the nation state and people going to war over bits of land. I mean, again, everybody. There's no great place in the world, so this is no bad place in the world. It's just how people are.
Yeah.
And yet the challenges which face us will only be solved by us all working together. So there's the dichotomy. At the time where division is happening, the things which we need to fix require us to be together.
No, definitely. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. I personally learned a lot, and I really feel like the audience will be able to pick up a lot from what you've said. Hopefully we can do this again, but regardlessly, it was an honor.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Third time I've been to India. Let's see what happens on the fourth time.
Let's do it.
Thank you, Professor Avi Loeb, for being on the show today. You have been the mind behind some of the most exciting theories about extraterrestrial life and interstellar travel. Your work has pushed the boundaries of science by exploring signs of alien civilizations and so many other topics. It's truly an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I should say that the one reason I'm searching for a higher intelligence in interstellar space is I don't find it often here on Earth.
Exactly. That makes so much sense. I actually graduated in consciousness studies. That was my major, and that's where I really personally got interested in really exploring this whole aspect. I want to go just straight into it. Our audience is really keen on knowing the story of Oumuamua and why you think it might be of artificial intelligence, and if there is any evidence that supports the idea of this not being a typical asteroid or comet.
Yeah, so Oumuamua basically changed my track of research. Before that, I worked for several decades on the first stars and galaxies in the universe. That was a subject that not many people were interested in. It's sort of the scientific version of the story of Genesis. I was among the people who designed the Webb telescope when it was called the Next Generation Space Telescope. I was on the scientific advisory committee for that design, and back in 1995. And I wrote 2 textbooks on the first stars and galaxies. Now it's one of the major frontiers that the Webb telescope is pioneering. It found galaxies when the universe was just a few 100 million years old. And another subject I worked on was black holes, and I was the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard that brings together astronomers, physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers. I was also chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, but for 9 years. But in 2017, October 19th, 2017, there was a very unusual discovery reported from the Pan-STARRS telescope, a survey telescope of the sky that was looking around at near-Earth objects because they pose a risk to our existence. We know that dinosaurs were killed 66 million years ago by an object the size of Manhattan Island, 10 kilometers or so. And we think that we are smarter than dinosaurs were, the non-avian dinosaurs. So we can forecast in advance when such an object will collide with Earth, and we want to prevent that. And so there was this plan that started in 2005 because the US Congress tasked NASA to find most of those near-Earth objects that could pose a risk to us. And so Pan-STARRS was developed to look for near-Earth objects. And there it was, a near-Earth object that they flagged just because it was near-Earth. It was the size of a football field, about 100 meters based on the amount of sunlight reflected from it. But it was moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. And that was the first object that was declared as coming from outside the solar system because the sun's gravity is not strong enough to bind it. And it looked really peculiar because the more data we collected on it, the more anomalous it looked. It was tumbling every 8 hours, and the amount of sunlight reflected changed by a factor of 10. So that meant it has a very extreme shape. When you see most of the area, you get 10 times more light reflected than when it looks sort of sideways on the sky, projected on the sky. And the best fit to the variation of light was that of a pancake-shaped object, a flat object, disc-like. Moreover, it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force. And it was mysterious because there was no evidence for dust or gas that you see around comets, that, the evaporation of those gives the comet a kick from the rocket effect, the same mechanism that pushes jet planes. But there was no evidence for dust. It was definitely not a comet of a type that we are familiar with. And nevertheless, there was this non-gravitational acceleration. And I suggested that it's just a reflection of sunlight that is pushing this object. And at the time, that sounded very reasonable to me because I was working on the possibility of propelling a small spacecraft with a very powerful laser. It's called a light sail, basically having a thin membrane that is being pushed by light. And so when I realized this object is being pushed by some mysterious force without any cometary tail, I said, well, maybe it's a very thin object, just like a light sail. And turns out that 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii found an object that is definitely pushed by sunlight. And then shortly afterwards, the astronomers realized, oh, that one is actually a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. So we know that it was technological. And I said, well, we know who produced the 2020 SO. This is the second object. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? And, just raising this question that it may have been technologically manufactured, at first, it didn't make it wasn't too problematic because, the reviewer, the referee of my paper accepted it for publication within 3 days. That's unheard of. It's really fast in the most prestigious journal that has the highest impact factor, the Astrophysical Journal Letters. But then as soon as the media and the public started paying attention, I started getting pushback and personal attacks. But I decided not to surrender because this is still a viable possibility. I should say that a week ago, I was informed that there is a whole class of space trash. These are called trash bag objects that are basically behaving just like empty trash bags that are being pushed by the wind down the street. And these are known to be pushed by radiation pressure from the sun, and they exhibit very unusual motions. And these are just pieces of satellites that were broken around the Earth. And so there is this entire population of empty trash bag objects that I was not aware of. And here comes Oumuamua and behaves like an empty trash bag. But I just suggested the possibility that it may be technological in origin, because, there may be a lot of such fragments that came from megastructures that were constructed, let's say, by advanced civilizations. One example to think about is a Dyson sphere. That's a megastructure that was imagined by Freeman Dyson to capture as much energy as possible from a host star by surrounding it with a spherical collection of possibly light sails that are hovering above the star and collecting the energy. But stars evolve and they become much more bright towards the end of their life. And you can imagine such a megastructure breaking up as a result of radiation and radiation pressure. And all of these pieces will be carried into interstellar space and would appear as anomalous Oumuamua-like objects. So for me, the discovery of Oumuamua was really a milestone because it changed my perception. I realized that there is a completely new way for us to discover evidence for other civilizations, which is very similar to archaeology, finding relics left over. And those civilizations that produce these relics may not be around anymore. They may be dead, but we can still figure out that they existed.
That is incredible. And I can't believe you received, like you said, a lot of attack and personal attacks as well for this discovery. That shows that you've really just been an outcast by the scientific community throughout your career. That's wow.
I should say that the only reason I can that I don't need to care about the pushback, that I can survive, is because I'm well established and I'm very familiar with situations where, for example, we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. 85% of it is called dark matter. And when I worked on this subject, it was very much encouraged to think about innovative ideas and non-conventional explanations for dark matter, because then the observers and the experimentalists, if you suggest something that looks interesting, they would search for it. And you were rewarded for actually proposing it. But for some reason, in this context, when I suggest a non-conventional explanation for Oumuamua, all the experts that used to work on asteroids or comets, they keep arguing that it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. It's definitely a rock. And to me, it's a surprise because, for example, Elon Musk launched the Tesla Roadster car as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy launch of 2018. And it's now going in a elliptic orbit around the sun. And in fact, just in January 2025, at the beginning of January, an amateur astronomer reported about an object, an asteroid that comes close to Earth, and it was given a name, and then some people realized, actually, this one has orbital parameters, just like the Tesla Roadster car. And so then, of course, they removed it from the asteroid list. But what I'm saying is, Elon Musk may not be the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years. So imagine a lot of space trash, Tesla Roadster type objects floating in space. And, of course, my colleagues would argue it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And I feel like the young kid in Hans Christian Andersen's tale that said, Oumuamua has no cometary tail, similar to the emperor has no clothes. And the adults in the room say, oh no, it has a tail, but you just can't see it. It's just like this folk story. Now, if you ask the experts on comets, they would say it's a comet, and it's a dark comet. That's the way they classify it now. It's a dark comet, meaning it's a comet with a cometary tail that cannot be seen, okay? And I say, okay, well, you may call an elephant a zebra without stripes. So you may say an elephant is an unstriped zebra. But that's not the right way to categorize it. You can't just say a dark comet because it's an oxymoron. A comet is identified by its cometary tail. You are telling me to believe that it's a comet even though the signature of a comet is not observed. Why should I do that? I mean, you would call the Tesla Roadster car of Elon Musk a dark comet, wouldn't you?
Wow, that is incredible. I have personally read a lot of the essays that you've published. They're all amazing. There are a couple topics I wanted to discuss about. There was one essay you wrote about, I think you suggested that replicating the conditions that birthed the universe could bring us closer to quote unquote God's expertise. I want to know from you that how might future technologies like AI or quantum computers help us uncover these mysteries?
Well, that's an excellent question. So first, let me explain what I mean. When we go, we see that the universe is expanding, and so if we reverse the history backwards in time, we would realize that there was a point in time when the density of matter and radiation was infinite because you compress everything, and that point in time is called the Big Bang. Now, Einstein's theory of gravity breaks down at that point in time because the curvature of space-time becomes very extreme, and we just don't have a theory that unifies gravity with quantum mechanics. So when you get to very high density of matter and radiation, you really need to include quantum mechanical effects. And Einstein's theory is divorced from quantum mechanics. Both of them were theories developed a century ago. Einstein's theory about a decade before quantum mechanics was fully discovered, and both of them operate in different regimes usually when we encounter them, but at the Big Bang they are both important, but we don't have a quantum gravity theory. However, if we had such a theory, we could have forecasted what happened before the Big Bang, because we can go through what now looks like a singularity, and actually it would not be a singularity when you have quantum gravity, and we could figure out what were the initial conditions that led to the Big Bang. And that is similar to having a recipe for a cake. So a recipe for a cake includes the ingredients, the way you should put them together, how much heat you should apply at each stage. And if you have a recipe for a cake, you can hope to become a chef. You can imagine that the only thing you're missing is an oven and the ingredients. And once you have the opportunity to mix them in the right way, then you would be able to bake a cake. And so a quantum gravity scientist could have the same, the same wish of, instead of making a cake, making a baby universe. If that quantum gravity scientist knows what the ingredients are, then that scientist knows how, in principle, you can arrange for those ingredients and a process that would give rise to a baby universe. Now, if you think about advertising the job of God, the job advertisement would, at the very least, say that anyone that wants to apply to the job of God should be able to create a universe. Because in all religions, God is responsible for everything we find.
Correct, yes.
So my point is that a quantum gravity scientist could apply for that job. Now, we don't have such scientists, but an alien civilization that had more than 100 years of science and technology, let's say they had thousands of years, millions of years, or even billions of years, they may have cracked the secret of quantum gravity, and they may have the recipe for creating a baby universe. From our perspective, they might resemble the notion of God because they can create everything in the universe. And if you think about it, maybe the universe was made by a scientist. Our universe was made by a scientist, and it allows for scientists to appear in it that will create baby universes. So it's just like, each generation of humans has babies that eventually mature, become adults, and have babies of their own, and it's sort of baby universes all the way. So that's a possibility, but we don't know. So if I had an opportunity to meet an alien scientist, the first question I would ask is, what happened before the Big Bang? And then if you ask me what is the impact of knowing that, it could unify science and religion, because many of the questions addressed by religion represent an entity that is superhuman, which I can imagine being an alien advanced civilization. That could be a good approximation to what we imagine as the ability of God.
Thank you for that explanation. And I also read one of your essays about some drone that was here in New. So I live in New Jersey for the last 25 years. I've been on this planet, but I was actually traveling the last couple months, and I don't know when this happened, but apparently there was some mystery drone in New Jersey. Can you talk a little bit about what that was and what you thought it was?
Yeah, so a lot of drones were reported, and they were some of them were big, the size of an SUV, and people who live in New Jersey were very puzzled by that, and we didn't get much information from the US government. But most recently, President Trump announced that they looked into it, and at least all the information that they were able to retrieve is telling them that these were authorized by FAA and they were either government related or private citizens that were trying to fly drones. So the claim is there was nothing unusual. It was not an adversarial nation, according to the White House. I don't know if they know everything on this. The Galileo project that I'm leading aims to monitor the sky, following the reports from the Director of National Intelligence that there are anomalous objects. I don't care about any human-made objects. I'm primarily interested, even if there is 1 in a million of the things that we see in the sky. Obviously, it's a mixed bag. There could be drones, balloons, airplanes, satellites. Even if there is 1 in a million that came from outside of this Earth, I want to find it. And actually, the Galileo project has one observatory already operating at Harvard University, and we just published a paper on the commissioning data of 500,000 objects that we monitored in the first 5 months. And we hope to be able pretty soon to have the ability to infer the distance of objects in the sky just by using the method of triangulation, having multiple sensors looking at the same object from different directions, just like the 2 human eyes allow us to gauge the distance of an object. And so that is one observatory, but I just received the funding for another one in Pennsylvania, another one in Nevada, and potentially also in Indiana. So hopefully by summer 2025, we'll have 3 operating observatories, and then another one within 2 years after that. And they will give us a few million objects in the sky every year within 2025, let's say. So if one object behaves in ways that have flight characteristics clearly beyond the performance of human-made technologies, that will be extremely exciting. And I always tell my team, we can write a paper dedicated to just this unusual object. If we don't find such an object, we will do statistics of those objects that we see that are birds, airplanes, and so forth. Now, with respect to New Jersey, we did try to look, but my impression was that these are human-made drones. Based on all the reports, they were flying like human-made drones. So I was not particularly excited about it.
But I'm really happy to know about the project that you're working on. I'm excited to know about further updates that we get on this. It sounds like an amazing project.
I should say just one more thing about the project. We have 2 other avenues that we are pursuing. One is to find more objects like Oumuamua. And this year, there will be a new observatory in Chile called the Rubin Observatory that will employ a camera of 3.2 gigapixels, 1,000 times more pixels than a cell phone camera. And it will monitor the southern sky every 4 days. And so we hope to find Oumuamua-like objects from the same family with this telescope every few months, and then we could potentially use the Webb telescope to study them. That's something we didn't have with Oumuamua because the Webb telescope was not launched yet. And the other path of investigation is related to objects that collide with Earth. These are called meteors, and they are cataloged by the US government. The US government operates a network of satellites that are looking for the heat emitted by ballistic missiles because they pose a national security threat. But every now and then, there is an object that comes from outer space that collides with Earth, and they can see the fireball as the object burns up as a result of its friction on air. And they catalog. NASA then gets the data because it doesn't represent anything to do with national security, so they release it to the scientific community in a catalog. I asked my student to look back at that catalog, and we found an object that was interstellar, just like Oumuamua, that was moving actually faster than 95% of the stars outside the solar system. So it was really fast, and it maintained its integrity down to the lower atmosphere. So it was made of material that is very tough. And so we published it with the undergraduate student, Amir Siraj. That was his name, not far from your first name, Amir. And then I decided to lead an expedition to the Pacific Ocean, to the location of that fireball, that explosion. And we retrieved materials from the bottom of the ocean that is about 2 kilometers deep. And we analyzed 10% of those materials so far, and we found some fraction of the material, about a tenth of it, of these tiny fragments that we collected. They were less than a millimeter in size. About a tenth of them had a chemical composition different from the materials that made the solar system. And we are now hoping to go again to that site to collect bigger fragments that would be able to tell us much more about the original object. So this expedition that, it was filmed by Netflix. There would be a documentary released within a year about it. But it offers an opportunity to put our hands on material of objects that came from outside the solar system for a few $1 million in cost. Whereas if you wanted to do the same for an object like Oumuamua that is passing near Earth, it would cost billions of dollars to do the same, as with the asteroid Bennu that I mentioned before. So looking for interstellar meteors is one of the additional objectives of the Galileo project, and searching for artificial objects, that were unusual in terms of their speed, in terms of their material strength. Perhaps they were made by an advanced technological civilization.
Wow. You had an essay, Professor, that was titled something like, "What if aliens turned out to be non-vegetarian?" The reason I want to ask you about this is because I guess the question comes down to that: if alien civilizations do come and live with us, if somehow we merge, are humans in danger in any way, according to you?
Well, Stephen Hawking a decade ago argued that we should be really careful in transmitting radio signals because there might be predators out there and they will come to haunt us. The thing is, we don't know the consequence. We have been broadcasting since, for 100 years. And so these signals went out. We cannot stop them. They are propagating at the speed of light. And so far, they reached about 100 light years. And, there are, within 100 light years, there are probably of the order of tens of thousands of stars. We don't know if any of them has technological civilizations. So we might not hear back until these signals go another factor of 10 in distance, when there would be a good likelihood for an active technological civilization with radio receivers that could search for us. Eventually, the entire galaxy will be aware of us, but it will take a while. It will take tens of thousands of years, which by cosmological terms, it's really a short time. But for us, we still benefit from the fact that we are visible as a technological civilization only to our immediate vicinity. The signals of light did not make it still to very large distances. But I don't agree with Stephen Hawking. And he, by the way, he visited my home about 7 years ago. Sorry, it was actually 9 years ago. 9 years ago. I don't agree with him because I think that we are not that significant. We tend to think that we deserve attention. And by the way, that's one reason that Enrico Fermi said, "Where is everybody?" And when a lonely person asks you this question, "Where is everybody?" you tell that lonely person, don't be presumptuous. You're not that attractive that everyone will come to sit next to you and you will see your partner immediately. You have to be proactive. You have to at least look through the windows of your home and see if there's anyone out there that you might like, or go out of your home and go to dating sites. Okay, that's what you say to. And Enrico Fermi didn't really use a telescope to search for aliens. He was just saying, "Where is everybody?" as if they were supposed to be in Los Alamos, where he was having lunch in the 1950s, which, it's a very short period of time relative to the billions of years that cosmic history is measured by. So that's very presumptuous. And it may well be that there are lots of relics. I calculated, based on the interstellar meteor that we know about, there should be of order 1 million objects from interstellar space right now, the size of a person roughly, or a meter in size, within the orbit of the Earth around the sun. 1 million of them. And one of them collides with Earth every decade, simply because it happens to cross the path of the Earth around the sun. But most of them just pass in the darkness. We can't see them because they reflect very little sunlight. But if I had a few $1 billion, I would engage in a search, a dedicated search, and looking through the rocks, that there must be a lot of rocks, and checking if there is anything other than rocks, if there is any space trash from other civilizations. This is something we've never engaged in. There are only a few interstellar objects known so far. And I think we should definitely check our backyard for any packages that may have arrived from a neighbor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that input. I need to ask you this. Considering the vastness of the universe, do you believe that space-time itself might hold secrets that we've yet to comprehend, perhaps even related to interstellar travel? And does space-time actually exist according to you? I know Professor Donald Hoffman talks a lot about this. I would love to know your insights.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that we are the pinnacle of creation. As much as this may sound like bad news, it's actually good news, because we can benefit from a higher level of intelligence. I mean, just think about it. We spend $2.4 trillion every year on military budgets, and they are dedicated to either killing other people or protecting us from other people killing us. And it's all related to political disputes and conflicts, mostly about territories or resources on this rock that we were born on. But there is so much real estate out there. We just need to look up rather than down on each other. And it's a lack of intelligence for us to be possessed, with all these conflicts on the resources we find on this rock that we were born on. It's such a tiny piece of the big picture. A sign of intelligence would be to explore other places, go beyond the solar system, not just to Mars, and send our ambassadors beyond the solar system, and think about very long term, not the next year or the next 4 years, the way that politicians think. Politicians are not necessarily the best role models. I think that our best role models are in interstellar space. There are other civilizations, and we should aspire to find them, because we can do better than we are doing right now. Now, related to what you asked before, we are developing artificial intelligence that could supersede the human brain within the coming decade. And in that case, we can take advantage of those systems that we develop, I think of them as our technological kids. And I have no problem with my daughters being smarter than I am. I see that I'm very proud of that. So if we develop AI systems that are more capable cognitively than us and are able to process a lot of data, much more than the human brain can, and they see patterns and they understand things that we don't understand, perhaps they will alert us to things that we missed. And, as we discussed before, a large, the majority of the scientific community refuses to discuss this subject seriously, meaning allocating billions of dollars to the research, making it part of the mainstream. And this approach, is really not very productive because, we also don't know what the dark matter is. We are investing billions of dollars. We haven't found it. Maybe gravity is modified. Maybe there is no dark matter, but we are not bothered by that because that's the spirit of science. And on a question that is so important for the future of humanity, we should definitely spend a few $1 billion to figure out, whether there are other technological civilizations. We shouldn't jump into conclusions before collecting the evidence. That's the way science is done. We should be open-minded. And I think it's a missed opportunity so far. And that's why, despite the pushback, I feel very strongly about promoting this frontier. Now, if I were a young person, I wouldn't be able to get a job if I were to operate this way because, obviously, there are all these echo chambers where people amplify the narrative that was developed for decades and just introduce nuances to what is already known. And, as boring as it sounds, that's the only way for people to not to take risks and promote their career, get honors and awards, and be recognized as experts. But it's not really the reason that we do science, and I see science as the privilege of maintaining our childhood curiosity. I haven't changed much since I was a small child because, I was wondering about the world. That's I was really trying to figure out things, and I see the job of a scientist as being exactly the same. And you make mistakes when you explore because you don't know the answer in advance, but you're open-minded. You don't assume that something is an extraordinary claim and therefore we shouldn't invest any effort in trying to address it. So I tell my students, never pretend to be the adult in the room. Maintain your childhood curiosity. And the only reason I can deliver this message is because I have tenure at Harvard University. I served as chair of the astronomy department for 9 years. I know the way science is done from the inside out. And I'm a practicing scientist. So I'm not like those popularizers of science. If you look at some of them, people like Brian Cox or Neil deGrasse Tyson, they basically describe what other scientists are doing. Okay, it's sort of like commentators on a soccer match. They tell you how Cristiano Ronaldo is passing the ball and so forth, but they are not really on the field.
Right.
And I'm doing my, I'm in the trenches. I publish papers every month, a few of them, so I'm doing it, from a perspective of a curious kid that wants to figure out the world without assumptions.
I definitely agree. First of all, I do think that, yes, a higher budget needs to be allotted for these experiments and for this research. And it's so great to have someone like you with this expertise who's actually working on this cause. And like you said, from childhood, you've had this interest, which means you've always wanted to know about this. I truly feel that this is the biggest question in life, to understand, why we're here, what is outside of here. Personally, I'm interested in that as well, which is why I decided to study about consciousness and, in my education. I want to know from you, Professor, I think there's been a surge in government interest in UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena. So do you think that NASA and other space agencies are being transparent enough with their findings, or not really?
Not really. There was a committee established at NASA because when the previous NASA administrator, Bill Nelson, was appointed, he said that he would like to figure out what these unidentified anomalous phenomena are, what these UAPs are, because he saw some data when he was in the Senate. And the following day, I contacted the person responsible for science under him, Thomas Zurbuchen, and he asked me to submit a white paper on this subject, and I told him I would like to study it scientifically. But then I never heard back. And they established a committee. And since I didn't hear back, a month later, I established the Galileo project that I'm leading on the search for unusual objects near Earth that may be extraterrestrial in origin. And they told me that the committee will now look into it and make recommendations. So altogether, it took them 2 years, and eventually the committee recommended that the scientific work should be done on this subject. And I said, well, that's what the Galileo project is doing. So what did you actually manage to accomplish by having this committee? So again, people like to talk and establish committees, but what really needs to be done is the work. And that's what the Galileo project is doing. NASA, at the end, as a result of this committee, established a small office within NASA, which is basically delivering information that they get from their satellites, from all the data centers, delivers it to the Pentagon. That's my understanding. So they basically identified this as a subject of interest to the Defense Department, because some of these objects presumably are produced by other adversarial nations, and they want to know everything about them. But they haven't explored the scientific path of saying, suppose 1 in a million is not from China, Russia, North Korea, whatever. Shouldn't we find out? That's curiosity-driven research, that has nothing to do with national defense. And they haven't explored that path. So I was disappointed by that. I hope that, if there would be new revelations about any data that indicates something beyond humans, that it will open the door for more scientific inquiry. But in the meantime, the Galileo project is doing the initial research that we can afford given the small level of funding that we have.
That's incredible. I asked this question to the guest we had from the European Space Agency as well. I want to know from you that, do you believe that the survival of humanity will depend on us becoming a multiplanetary species? And I guess a continuation of that is that, do you think the world is going to end at some point?
Definitely, there is no way out from the evolution of the sun. The sun is a nuclear reactor that we happen to be at the right distance from. It's just like being next to a fireplace, that gives you enough warmth and you feel comfortable. But imagine the fireplace getting hotter and hotter, and eventually, in the case of the sun, it will boil off all the oceans on Earth within 1 billion years. At that point, the Earth will turn into a desert. And I find it hard to believe that humanity would survive next to a star that gets more and more harmful. Eventually, the sun will expand when it becomes a red giant. That would take another 7 billion years from now, 7.6 to be accurate. And then it will engulf. It holds the potential to engulf the Earth. So the envelope of the sun will get so big that the Earth will be engulfed by it, so that the Earth would start spiraling into the core of the sun. And at that point, obviously, nobody can survive because the core would be very hot. So what is the long-term future of humanity? Well, if we will be intelligent enough to leave the planet before the conditions become very difficult, then we might survive over billions of years as a civilization. And you can imagine, right now, the most creative idea appears to be going to Mars. But I don't, that's the agenda advocated by Elon Musk and echoed by President Trump. But it's just another rock, okay, that happened to be at some distance from the sun and used to have liquid water on the surface, doesn't have an atmosphere. The temperature changes by hundreds of degrees between day and night. And there are very energetic particles, cosmic rays, that damage the human body. Over a period of a few years, the human body would be damaged beyond repair. So the only way to survive there would be to go underground, which would be ironic because humanity started in caves and we would have to end up in caves. If I had the opportunity to go into a cave on Mars, these are called lava tubes, I would search the walls of that cave for any prehistoric paintings because there might have been someone over there. But at any event, it's just another rock. And why would we go to another rock? If we want to do that, it has actually a moon called Phobos, and I recommended going to that moon as a loading dock because it's easy to go in and out of Phobos and then from there deliver the goods to Mars. But what I imagine in the longer term is having some space platform, and I call it Noah's spacecraft, in the spirit of Noah's Ark, the biblical story where Noah built an ark to save animals from the great flood. And you can imagine an analog saving life from a catastrophe on Earth by building a spacecraft, a space platform. So I can imagine something like that. There is a question of what replaces gravity, and one idea is rotation of the spacecraft will give us an effective gravity. You will have to maintain a habitat that allows people to live there. But, we moved from the jungles of Africa, we moved to cities.
Right.
That's a big leap, going from trees to high rises. And going from high rises to space sounds to me like less of a leap than going from a jungle to high rises.
And do you suspect, around what year? I know you were describing the whole scientific aspect of why the world would end if it has to. Do you know what year that would probably be, if any?
Oh, no. So if the sun is the issue, then it will be billions of years, okay? 1 billion years for the oceans to evaporate, and after that, 7.6 billion years for the sun to engulf the Earth and carry it to the center of the remnant. There will be a white dwarf there. But there are other catastrophes that are shorter term. And the one that I'm worried about the most is artificial intelligence, AI, because, we developed modern science and technology over the past century. Quantum mechanics was discovered just 100 years ago. That's it. So you may ask, okay, how much more do we have? How much more time do we have? If you were to choose a random day in your life, it will most likely not be the first day and not your last day. It will be somewhere in the middle. So if we say, we are now in the middle of our lifespan as a technological civilization, we just have another century or two. And actually, technology is accelerating. AI is evolving exponentially on a few year timescale. So I'm really worried that the technologies we develop, one way or another, will bring risks that we don't even appreciate because they are accelerating in ways that we have never witnessed before. The risks are unprecedented. We are getting better at dealing with people. There are less wars, less conflicts, because information is shared in a way that was not as transparent in the past. But there are other risks that come with that, and AI is one of them. And it's not clear to me how much longer we would survive. And one way to save us that I see is by realizing what saved aliens. If we realize another civilization managed to survive for a long time, produced a lot of self-replicating probes that we find, we would have a role model.
Wow. As we end this conversation, Professor, I would love to know your takeaway message for everyone listening, to be honest. You have so much expertise and knowledge. What is your takeaway message that really comes from your heart to the people?
Well, stay open-minded and young in the way that you approach life, and because it's all about learning. It's a learning experience. Being a scientist is learning about nature. You know, there is an arbitrator. Science is better than politics because by getting data and evidence about nature, we can learn something that we didn't expect, something new, because it's independent of us. You know, there is some physical reality out there that we can study. And we have some ideas about what it may bring, what kind of, how to think about it. But when we collect data and evidence, very often we learn something new. And therefore it's fun because you keep growing. And the only way to grow and to learn something new is if you don't assume that you already know everything. And, you know, a lot of adults pretend to know much more than they actually know. That's what bothered me as a kid when I would sit in the dinner table, ask a difficult question, and the adults in the room would give me answers that didn't make sense. And the beauty of science is that you can stay a kid. And it's better than politics, because in politics, it's all about power, pretending. You know, if you manage to convince a large crowd of something, you have political power. But it doesn't mean that this something is correct. That's why very often we fall into a pit. We believe something, and it turns out to be wrong, and then we suffer from that. So that's the way politics takes place. And, you know, people have different political views. So if you were to train AI on political questions, you would not get a single answer. You would get, at the very least, two answers, one from the left, one from the right. So you would not be able to represent reality in a unified way. There will always be at least two possible answers. And, you know, when you see newspapers, they subscribe either to one answer or the other in the way that they are leaning. And so that is the source of polarization in politics. But the beauty of science is that even if initially, because of ignorance, you have people with different opinions, different views, eventually, if you collect enough data, it becomes irrefutable. So if I find a gadget at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean that has buttons on it, the only question, and it looks like it was extraterrestrial in origin, nobody would be able to doubt that. And the only question that remains is, should I press a button?
Thank you so much, Professor Avi Loeb, for sharing this message. I applaud you for the courage you have to speak up about everything you found. It's very few who, have that expertise in their field and have the courage to stand out amongst the crowd. So thank you so much for doing that. I really encourage everyone watching to look out for your published work and your essays. I'm just addicted to them. I'm going through them one by one. So thank you so much for your time. It was an honor to host you here today.
Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure, and stay young and open-minded.
Thank you.
Joining me is Professor Avi Loeb, the renowned Harvard astrophysicist who shook the scientific world with his bold theories. Get ready, because today we're challenging what we think we know about the universe, life beyond Earth, and humanity's place on it. Welcome, Professor Avi Loeb, to Under the Tree.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. You know, we recently hosted Mark McGruen from the European Space Agency, and we briefly touched upon the subject of aliens. In your opinion, Professor, what are the most compelling pieces of evidence we currently have for alien life, and why do you think the scientific community remains skeptical?
Without seeking the evidence, we will never know. And so the problem in scientific inquiry is that very often scientists assume the answer in advance or claim that it is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. But because life is very often a self-fulfilling prophecy, they're not seeking the evidence because they regard it as extraordinary. And as a result, we don't find the evidence. And my point is that it's not an extraordinary claim, because we know that we exist on this planet called Earth, near a star like the sun. And we know, based on the latest data, that there should be of order 100 billion Earth-Sun systems at roughly the same separation, so that if the planet has an atmosphere, it could have liquid water on the surface and the chemistry of life as we know it. And moreover, most of these stars formed billions of years before the sun. And so it's actually a completely ordinary claim to argue that something like us may have existed billions of years ago. It's actually arrogant and extraordinary to claim that we are unique and special and there is nothing like us under similar circumstances in 100 billion other systems within the Milky Way galaxy alone. And there are a trillion galaxies like the Milky Way in the entire universe. Now you may say, okay, well, we could search for microbes, and that's actually the approach taken by astrobiologists. They're willing to invest more than $10 billion in the Habitable World Observatory planned for 2040 or later. And that is the highest priority that was defined in the decadal survey of the astronomy community this decade. Of course, Earth may have developed microbial life as soon as it cooled, but it's very difficult to find evidence for microbial life. We can either find it by going places like within the solar system, going to Mars and checking the soil, or looking under the ice for any microbes in the liquid water that is on moons like Enceladus or Europa. But another approach is to check the composition of the atmosphere of exoplanets. And we can do that by monitoring as they pass in front of their host star, monitoring the light that goes through the atmosphere and looking for the fingerprints of those molecules that on Earth were produced by life, such as methane, oxygen, and if we find those molecules, it will not be conclusive that they resulted from life, because you can have geological processes that potentially, naturally, would produce some of these molecules without having life. On the other hand, even though intelligent life came to Earth just over the past few million years in the form of humans, the signatures are much more robust, because if we find a gadget that was manufactured by another civilization near Earth, it will be not only evidence for life, but evidence for intelligent life. And it's much clearer, a much clearer signature. We can look for industrial pollution in the atmospheres of planets. We can look for city lights. These are subjects that I wrote papers on. But in the past, over the past 70 years, a small minority of the scientific community that was sort of put in the periphery of all funding agencies involved searching for radio signals, because we transmitted radio signals. And so the idea was, let's check if there are any transmissions from other civilizations near other stars. But this is just like waiting for a phone call at home. Nobody may call you when you're waiting. The approach that I'm suggesting, alternative to that, is to search for technological objects, because we did launch probes that will exit the solar system, go to interstellar space. We are polluting space with space trash. In fact, around the Earth right now, there are plenty of broken pieces of satellites and other debris. And just imagine in a billion years, when the sun would brighten up, it will produce enough radiation to and there will be enough material carried by the wind coming from the sun as it evolves to a red giant, so that all this debris will be swept into interstellar space. So even the space trash that surrounds the Earth would eventually make it because of the evolution of the sun. And so since most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun, it could have been that other technological civilizations are not alive anymore. They will not transmit any. Most of them are dead, just like most of the 117 billion people that lived on Earth are not alive anymore. But we can look for relics that they left behind, and in the form of space trash, in the forms of functional devices, gadgets that we might find. And that kind of a study was not done. And all I'm saying is, we should invest at least a few $1 billion in that because we want to hedge our bets. And without searching for those things, we cannot say anything. And so, recently, a couple of months ago, I placed a bet against Elon Musk. I heard Peter Thiel saying on a podcast after the elections that nobody should bet against Elon Musk. And so the following day, I placed a bet in an essay that I published on medium.com. And in the bet, I basically said I'm willing to put 1% of my net worth against 1% of Elon Musk's net worth, which would be $4 billion for him. And let's put it in a pool that will be allocated to the search for extraterrestrial civilizations, because he said that we're probably alone. And I'm saying, no, we're probably, there were plenty of students in our class, and we're probably in the middle of the class in terms of our abilities, and there were much more advanced technological civilizations. We just need to search for them. We haven't done that. So with this central pool of funds, I suggest we will search for those technological gadgets. And if within a decade we don't find them, I'm willing to put another 1% of my net worth and give it to Elon Musk as a gift. I haven't heard from him, but my point is that the scientific projects of this great importance were funded at $10 billion in the past, like the Large Hadron Collider, the Webb telescope. And this question of whether we are alone, whether there are neighbors out there that we can learn from, is extremely interesting to the public. And so it would make a lot of sense for science to address this question using the tools that we have. And I have a very clear agenda of how to advance our knowledge on this question. New knowledge doesn't fall into our lap. We really have to invest time, effort, and money. And for example, we search for the dark matter, for maybe 50 years now. That's 85% of the matter in the universe. We have no idea what its nature is, and we haven't found it. And the Large Hadron Collider was supposed to perhaps find hints for it. It didn't find any. And so that's not a failure. That's the way science is done. But what I'm saying is, even if we don't find the dark matter, nobody regrets investing billions of dollars in the search. So on a question that much more appeals to the public, I think we should definitely spend this money before we say that it's an extraordinary claim to think that we are unique, that we are not unique and special.
Wow, it was so well put. This is something I'm very much interested in myself, and I had one specific question as well, and I've been wanting to ask this for a long time. Would you consider aliens to be sentient beings or have the possibility of becoming sentient?
Well, there is Darwinian selection, the natural selection in the context of aliens. Of course, there might be a lot of dumb aliens, like some of the animals that we eat in restaurants. We allow ourselves to eat animals in restaurants just because we think that they're not as intelligent as we are. So we feel superior to them. And so I'm sure there are lots of those on exoplanets. But to find them, we will need to go there and search through the trees, all the natural habitat to find them, because they are not intelligent enough to be distinguishable from nature. I mean, that's the way we were until the last century or so of modern science and technology. Before that, we were not very different from nature. And therefore, to find civilizations that are less than we were up to 100 years ago would be very difficult. But once they start developing space technologies, everything changes, because then they, in principle, send relics into space that could be found. And, these would be just like plastics in the ocean. They keep accumulating over time. Time is measured in the universe in units of billions of years. So, And these objects that we launched to space are moving at tens of kilometers per second. So that's at most 10 times less than the escape speed from the Milky Way galaxy. It's the distance that such objects traverse in a second is similar to the distance that a car in the highway traverses in an hour. But nevertheless, it's 10 times slower than the speed needed to escape from the pull of gravity of the Milky Way. So they keep accumulating these interstellar objects that are launched as rockets, like we did, like Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, New Horizons. Even though they will escape the solar system, they would leave the Oort cloud, the periphery of the solar system, within 10,000 years. It would take they would not be able to escape from the Milky Way. So they will add to the space trash that is there already from previous civilizations. And so we should just look for it. We look through our windows and we see all these houses on our cosmic street. And so, the folklore within the scientific community is to say, okay, we see those houses, which are basically star Earth systems that are at the right separations to have liquid water on the surface of the planet, on the rock. And we see all these houses, but we don't know if they have any residents. And actually, there could be 100 billion of them in our cosmic street, just in the Milky Way galaxy. And nevertheless, we say it's an extraordinary claim to even imagine that they have residents like us. And I'm saying, no, it's arrogant to think that we are the only ones on the street, that there were some special circumstances. We started by saying, oh, we are at the center of the universe. Turns out that not only we're not at the center of the universe, we're not at the center of the solar system. The sun is at the center. We're not at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We are just one house out of many. And when I have two daughters that are very young, when they were born, their training data set was limited to the environment of the crib where they were. And once they started crawling and walking, the data set, just like with artificial intelligence systems, large language models, their training data set was enhanced to include the entire house. Just imagine them looking through the window and seeing other houses and claiming, we get a lot of attention from our family, from our parents, but we just think that it's an extraordinary claim to imagine that there are infants like us in those other houses. That would be their thinking, because they are not exposed to more data from what. And then they would have a psychological shock on the first day in the kindergarten. When they see a lot of kids like them, and many of them are smarter. And so what I would argue is astrobiologists and our civilization more generally did not mature yet. We insist that we are special. That's sort of natural, but when you think about the big picture, it seems to me as arrogant. And moreover, it's a circular argument if you claim that it's an extraordinary notion to have things like us elsewhere. I think what needs to be done is simply investing time and money to look for the evidence, which is what I'm doing within the Galileo project that we can talk about.
There was this movie that Leonardo DiCaprio made called Don't Look Up. And it kind of showed how everybody just obsessed with social media, and it just kind of fainted our eyes that even when a meteor is coming to kill the Earth, I think, and it was that no one even cared, and then the whole world ended. And I was reading some of your other essays and your beliefs, and how you're, and like, eventually in billions of years the sun is going to boil and it's going to kill the Earth, but we're not looking at it from that terminology. We're thinking more of the commercially driven aspects of things. Like, you even brought up Elon Musk earlier. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that as well, about what he's currently doing, what you think the role of private companies like SpaceX in even though it's commercially driven, do you think there is something in that that could help us undercover something?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of my funding over the past decade came from the private sector, from foundations or private individuals. And in fact, the Galileo project itself, just over the past month, received donations at the level of a few $1,000,000. So I'm very grateful to the outside community beyond academia, which is open-minded. The problem with the standard funding structure of the National Science Foundation, NASA, is that they rely on committees that are populated by traditional conservative scientists who are basically not willing to take risks because they argue, we are using taxpayers' money and therefore, should fund safe projects. The only problem is that they don't consult the taxpayers. If they were to ask the taxpayers what they care about, is it really what the nature of dark matter is, or do we have a partner in interstellar space? They would obviously tell you, fund the search for neighbors, And so my point is something is wrong in the way that the funding is allocated, but gladly the general public and wealthy individuals, they see the light, and therefore I'm able to pursue this research. Now, more generally, I think it could have a huge impact on the future of humanity. So it's not just a scientific matter that we need to clarify. You also need to think about what the implications would be for our future and the inspiration that it can give humans to do better than we did in the past, because we will have better role models. There would be these civilizations that manage to survive, so the fittest survives, according to Darwin, the natural selection. And in this context, it's the fittest that was able to survive over billions of years, despite all the risks, that come along. And some of them are self-inflicted, like we currently face. We face the existential risks from a nuclear or biological war, also from artificial intelligence, AI, that could sabotage our mental health, the mental health of society, much more so than social media did over the past decade. We know of a lot of problems that it introduced. It polarized our society, but AI is social media on steroids. And moreover, AI itself is not like any tool that we used in the past. When we built cars, we were able to control where they go by holding the steering wheel. So those tools that we built until now were inferior to us, and they would follow, they would align themselves with our wish. However, when you reach a point where you develop an artificial general intelligence so that it would have, let's say, more parameters than the human brain and could be more intelligent, have greater cognitive capabilities than human brains have, then for the first time, we will have a system that may have its own agenda that could actually trick us, could fool us, could give us the impression that it follows our wishes, but in fact, it is shaping our wishes in ways that we do not fully understand, because we think that it aligns itself with us, but at the same time, it has a hidden agenda. And moreover, it will interact with so many humans that once it will dominate the psychology, the way people think about the world, the data that they get, there could be a risk to humanity. And, one question of why there aren't many civilizations that we see in the radio sky that are interacting with us could be that after they develop AI, they sort of live in some virtual reality, in some, they get most of their attention to digital screen, not the real world, and they don't endeavor into space. It's really the ability to go into space that distinguishes a civilization can survive for long times relative to civilizations that are stuck on their home planet and perish when the star evolves. They simply die. There should have been a lot of tragedies of civilizations that simply died on their home planet. They came and went, and it's really, we are used to the history books of the history of humans on Earth, which actually spans only 7,000 years, the written history. We don't know what happened before the last 7,000 years. There is no document written about it. But think about billions of years and how many civilizations came and to life and died near other stars, and what kind of catastrophes they endured, and so there is a lot for us to learn. And those that survived are the ones we want to imitate. So I think, when traditional religions talked about a messianic message that will arrive to Earth and will bring prosperity and peace, the assumption was that this message will come from someone who was born on Earth, the Messiah. But I think this message will come from another star. And I don't think it will come in the form of radio transmissions. I think we might find an object near Earth, and we should search for it.
Wow. And my mind is already my mind is thinking so many things right now. But I'm so happy that we're also talking about, like, we're talking about the vast universe, but at the same time we're talking about our current situation here on Earth. And because we talked about Don't Look Up, I didn't want to ask, what do you think? Let's just say we do confront alien life. And how do you think our current the current Trump administration would deal with that?
Well, so there is a fundamental question of whether the government has any data or materials that may represent objects that arrived at Earth. Because there were 3 reports delivered to Congress by the Director of National Intelligence about unidentified anomalous phenomena, where military personnel report about objects that they cannot identify. And if these are human-made, then these reports signal weakness of the intelligence agencies. They just do not do their job, despite the huge amounts of funds that are paid for the defense budget. And so that's obviously one possibility, that these are objects manufactured by adversarial nations that we are not aware of. And there was an object like that, the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down a couple of years ago. And so it may well be that there are new technologies developed by other nations, but the alternative is that maybe there is something from out of this Earth that is not human-made and it's still technological. And of course, for that to be clear, we need the data. Now, if the government has some data that they collected over decades, or materials, as some whistleblowers claim, there were some congressional hearings in which various people, including David Grush, argued that there are programs within the US government for retrieval and reverse engineering of material from crash sites, including even functional devices, the claim was. And, I can easily imagine that such programs exist just because we want to get information about crash sites of flying objects manufactured by adversarial nations. Now, the only question is, did they find anything that is not human-made, that represents non-human intelligence? And the claim by those whistleblowers is yes, but I haven't seen direct evidence for that. And it may well be that if such materials were collected, they're being held by corporations outside government, like Lockheed Martin or others. And if such evidence exists, I very much hope that the new administration, just like President Trump issued an executive order to release information about the JFK assassination, that in the same way, there would be disclosure of information that has no significance for national intelligence, but has huge significance for us scientifically, about any findings that may represent technologies not from this earth. And it's relatively straightforward to separate human-made technologies from anything beyond this earth. There is a very simple way of doing that. If I had access to such materials, you can just check the composition of the material and date it using radioactive isotopes. All the materials that made the solar system have the same age, about 4.6 billion years. Something that came from another star should have a different age, because stars span a wide range of ages. Most of them are a few billion years older than the sun. So most likely you would find an age that exceeds the age of the solar system. If you were to use uranium or thorium, these are isotopes. I mean, thorium has thorium-232 has a half-life that is equal to the age of the universe, 14 billion years. Whereas uranium 238 has a half-life comparable to that of the solar system. So just by measuring the relative abundances of these isotopes and their decay products, you can tell, you can date the material. And so I would be able, within a relatively short time to tell you, if you give me materials, what's the age of that material and whether it came from outside the solar system. And so that's not difficult. Now, of course, if you see some technologies, evidence for technologies, it would be even clearer if those are human-made, because we pretty much know the limits of our technologies.
Also, Professor Loeb, I wanted to ask, could alien life exist in forms entirely different from carbon-based organisms? And how would we even begin to detect such life forms?
Definitely. We know about life that we see here on Earth. That's the only place where we found evidence for life. And it's based on very specific chemistry in liquid water. And it requires amino acids and so forth. And very interestingly, recently, material was retrieved from an asteroid called Bennu that was produced in the main asteroid belt as a result of some object impacting a protoplanet that was there. Okay, and so breaking it up, and Bennu is a piece of that original protoplanet, and the unusual thing about it is that a mission was sent, OSIRIS-REx was sent to land on Bennu and extract the material from it and deliver it back to Earth. And that happened, and the material was analyzed, and the results were announced just over the past month. And they found amino acid. Most of the amino acids that are used as building blocks in life on Earth existed on this rock, and that is amazing. That implies that the building blocks of life were very common. The amino acids that were used on Earth probably came to Earth as a result of impacts by asteroids like Bennu, or developed on Earth independently. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Mars was very similar to Earth. It had an atmosphere, it had liquid water on the surface. It actually cooled before Earth because it's a smaller body, so it had a larger surface per unit mass, and therefore, the heat content is proportional to mass, and the cooling rate is proportional to the surface area. And Mars just had faster cooling relative to the amount of heat that it included, and so it cooled before Earth, and developed probably. It's very likely that it developed chemistry similar to that of Earth because it had very similar environment to that of Earth, and that was around the time when there were lots of impacts of big objects, and it's possible that rocks were chipped off Mars that carried in their core life Martian life, microbes that were delivered to Earth. And so we might all be Martians. And when Elon Musk talks about bringing humans to Mars, it's just like going back to our childhood home, if that was the case. And, another possibility to keep in mind is, so this is called panspermia, where rocks can deliver tiny astronauts in the form of microbes. Those tiny astronauts preceded Elon Musk by 4.5 billion years or so. So they managed to do the trip from Mars to Earth much, much earlier than we hope to do back there. But in addition to that, you can imagine a gardener, some interstellar gardener, that decided Earth is a planet where biological life could potentially blossom, and they put some seeds of the type of life that they want to see on Earth, and then we have what we have right now. And that is more difficult to infer in retrospect. I mean, if you look at complex life like humans, that we have a lot of qualities that are quite amazing. Just think about, compared to AI systems that we currently have, the large language models, they require gigawatts just to operate a neural network that is 100 times smaller in terms of the number of parameters than the human brain, which requires only 20 watts of power. And it's remarkable. Now, of course, we might supersede the human brain, but I'm just saying that nature was able to produce such a complex system. And actually, the human brain evolved to the size that it has. It didn't evolve beyond that size because it's already using 20% of the energy metabolism of the human body, so it couldn't really grow because of the power constraints. However, in principle, AI, especially after DeepSeek, we can imagine that perhaps we might be able to develop more efficient large language models that use reasoning that would resemble the human mind better, and maybe we will eventually have a system that is more complex than the human brain, that has even more parameters than human brain, which in my view, once we get to that point, we would see emergent phenomena like consciousness, free will. These are the signatures of systems that are extremely complex. So when they respond to an environment that is not fully known, you see that they are not predictable. And that's what humans are. Now, one thing I wanted to comment is that if we ever encounter alien intelligence, which is also AI, by the way, alien intelligence, I would much rather have psychologists on my team than physicists, because they are used to dealing with intelligent systems, humans, and they would be better at interpreting what we are interacting with. So if you ask me what do I imagine, so in terms of life, it could be very different than we have, or it could be that there is this path to, using amino acids to the kind of life we have on Earth. One thing we need to keep in mind, all life forms on Earth have the same chirality. So amino acids, for example, are left-handed. Chirality is the way the molecules are organized, the structure of the molecules, and the way they interact with polarized light. So in principle, you can have them either right-handed or left-handed, but somehow this symmetry between right-handed and left-handed was broken on Earth. On Bennu, the amino acids had equal number of right-handed and left-handed amino acids. So that shows you that the starting conditions allow for both. If we ever meet a biological creature from an exoplanet, we should be really careful not to shake their hand, because if they're made of mirror life, in other words, the opposite chirality, our body is unable to protect itself against any microbes or viruses or things that relate to mirror life. This is also a cautionary remark about Mars. When we go there, it could have been that mirror life evolved there, and we need to be really careful there was just a month ago, there was an article in Science magazine by 38 experts who warned against doing experiments with mirror life, not generating mirror life on Earth with the opposite chirality, because it could be extremely dangerous. My point is that, asteroids could have delivered mirror life in the past. Somehow, life that we have was resilient to those deliveries. We sort of ignored these packages. So, we should not be too alarmed. But nevertheless, we should be careful when we go places not to interact with mirror life.
I also had a question about black holes. And, I've always wondered, could black holes or other cosmic phenomena be harnessed by advanced civilizations for energy or transportation? Is that a possibility?
Definitely. Black holes offer a lot of benefits as power sources of energy, for example, clean energy. You can basically dump your trash to a black hole and get clean energy in return with a large efficiency. So, when material drains into a black hole, you can get efficiencies of tens of percent in converting rest mass into radiation. So that's very high. Now, in a recent paper that I published, I talked about the ideal engine using a black hole, which is basically converting with 100% efficiency rest mass to radiation. There aren't many opportunities for a 100% efficient engine. One possibility you can dream about is having matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate and create radiation. But CERN produces micrograms of antimatter that cost billions of dollars. The universe is made of matter. There is almost no antimatter, very, very small amounts of antimatter, and even to produce them artificially is very expensive. So it's very difficult to imagine an engine based on antimatter. But if you have a black hole that weighs 100,000 tons, okay, which is it's like an asteroid that has a size of order 100 meters or so, not too large. Such a black hole, according to Stephen Hawking, and evaporates within a year and a half because it radiates. And that's a quantum mechanical effect. A black hole is like the ultimate prison. The prison walls are the event horizon of the black hole. So once you check in, you cannot check out, because even light cannot escape from a black hole. It's an extreme structure of space-time. However, if you are trying to squeeze a plump prisoner into a small prison, you just can't do it. Because if the prisoner is bigger than the size of the prison, you just cannot squeeze that prisoner. And that's what Hawking realized, that when dealing with a black hole, there is leakage of radiation from it. This is radiation that has a wavelength which defines, the characteristic size of a photon, a particle of light. It has a wavelength that is of the order of the size of the black hole event horizon. So radiation with that wavelength cannot be trapped within the prison, and therefore it escapes all the time and produces. And so the black hole loses energy and eventually evaporates, explodes. And so for 100,000 tons, the evaporation time is 1.5 years. But I calculated that if you dump 2.2 kilograms per second into such a black hole, then you can compensate for that evaporation. So it will maintain its mass, okay? And 2.2 kilograms per second is the amount of the mass of water that you get when you flush the toilet. So just imagine flushing the toilet again and again continuously into the black hole. That would keep it alive, okay? And then you basically convert mass to radiation with 100% efficiency, because all the mass that you dump into the black hole gets radiated in Hawking radiation. And then you just need to trap that radiation and convert it into heat, and you get an engine with 100% efficiency. So I basically said, if you ever see a moon of a planet that is not near a star, it's it's supposed to be very cold planet, and it has a moon that radiates a lot, that keeps it warm. And it could be that that civilization managed to somehow take advantage of this engine of 100%, because it would produce enough radiation to warm up a planet like the Earth the way that the sun warms us. So that's just an example of a black hole engine. But in general, black holes, most of them are much bigger than that. They're either the mass of a star, a massive star, at least a few times the mass of the sun, up to 100 times the mass of that. These are stellar mass black holes, or we know also very big black holes at the centers of galaxies that, the Milky Way has a 4 million solar masses black hole at the center, but the biggest galaxies in the universe have up to tens of billions of solar masses. These are gigantic black holes where the event horizon is the size of the solar system. It's huge. And you actually, if you were an astronaut crossing that event horizon, you wouldn't feel much tidal force ripping your body when you cross the event horizon. Of course, when you get to the singularity, then your body would be ripped apart. But it would take you hours to do the journey from the horizon to the center if we're talking about the biggest black holes in the universe. And for those, if you manage to hover just outside the horizon, time is ticking more slowly there relative to the rest of the universe. So you can age more slowly than your friends, let's say on Earth. And then you can imagine beauty salons where people maintain their youth close to the but it's like a horror story, because if you were to cross the horizon, then you are lost. Then you will end up at the singularity. So you really have to be careful. On the one hand, you benefit greatly by being just outside the horizon. You can even have an amusement park where you see your back, because photons, particles of light, go in a circle around the black hole close to it. And so you can see your back just by looking forward. There are all kinds of fun effects as a result of the curvature of space-time near a black hole. And you can imagine a civilization taking advantage, of course, especially in terms of harnessing the energy of the black hole, communicating with gravitational waves, because as you move around the black hole, you generate ripples in space-time and perhaps use it for communication. The advantage of gravitational waves is they cannot be blocked. So, this kind of communication will reach any place in the universe. And so there are some papers talking about how advanced civilizations may use the environments of black holes. But, black holes are rare. They're only of the order of 10 million of them that are stellar mass black holes in the Milky Way galaxy out of hundreds of billions of stars. But there is, as far as we know, one supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way, and perhaps at the center of the Large Magellanic Cloud. Both of them, which is a satellite of the Milky Way, both of them are of the order of 1 million solar masses. So at the center of the Milky Way, it's 4 million, and perhaps in the Large Magellanic Cloud of the order of 1 million solar masses. And then, of course, there is the Andromeda galaxy, which is approaching us and has a black hole somewhat larger than the Milky Way.
Thank you so much, Professor Avi Loeb, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. It's truly, from the bottom of my heart, it's truly been an honor talking to you.